Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Plass. Amanda Plass was born on December 11, 1990. She grew up in Choppy, Massachusetts, with her sister Emily and brother Nicholas. Amanda's mother, Michelle Mayes, described her daughter as a hippie and often joked that she was born in the wrong era. In 2011, Amanda worked as a waitress at a Friendly's in Choppy and was dating a 27-year-old carpenter named Seth Green. On August 26, 2011, Seth called 911 to report that he had found Amanda unconscious in the kitchen of her third-floor apartment. During the call, Seth tearfully told the operator that when he arrived, Amanda was lying on the floor, unresponsive, with multiple stab wounds to her body. He did not know how to help and requested the police and an ambulance. When paramedics arrived, they confirmed that Amanda had died from multiple stab wounds, including to her chest, throat, and abdomen. Police cordoned off the home where the crime took place. When they arrived, they found Seth on the porch, crying and unable to calm down. Detectives carefully searched Amanda's apartment. Whoever the perpetrator was, they had escaped but left behind some evidence. The first thing that caught the detectives' attention was the large amount of blood in the kitchen, indicating that the attack had been carried out with a knife. Police also found Nike shoe prints on the floor and handprints on the broken glass window. The motive for this brutal murder remains a mystery. Based on the condition and number of Amanda's injuries, detectives suspect that she may have known her attacker and that the motive was a personal vendetta. Therefore, the first suspect was Amanda's boyfriend, Seth Green. Police took Seth Green in for questioning. It was no surprise that he was the first suspect, given his close relationship with the victim, his blood-stained clothing, and his role in calling 911. The fact that he and Amanda had been dating for less than 2 weeks before her death, and that her family barely knew him, raised suspicions. Seth was 7 years older than Amanda and likely had different views on some issues. But did that lead to an argument that resulted in the brutal crime? This led investigators to suspect that Seth could be the killer, even though he claimed Amanda was dead before he arrived at her apartment. They determined that about 2 hours had passed between Amanda's death and Seth calling 911. That was enough time to cover up evidence and remove the weapon. So the first question detectives had to answer was whether Seth Green had anything to do with Amanda's death. When Seth showed up at the police station, he looked like he had just been through something terrible. He was mourning the death of his girlfriend. Investigators wanted to know if his feelings were genuine or if he was just trying to deflect suspicion from himself. During questioning, Seth said he had been working all day. He had planned to take Amanda to the restaurant where she worked, but couldn't because of his busy schedule. Seth said he didn't know Amanda well because they weren't in a long-term relationship, but he loved her and had no reason to hurt her. Seth worked as a carpenter at a construction site. Investigators began asking him about his tools, implying that he may have used one of them to commit the crime. Seth often used a tool belt at work, which contained a variety of carpentry tools, including a knife. However, he claimed that he always put the tool belt back after work, and that day was no exception. Seth finished the job, changed his clothes and tools, and then went to see Amanda. He understood why he was the most suspected, but he still insisted that he had nothing to do with his girlfriend's death. The police eventually confirmed Seth's alibi. He even passed a lie detector test. When he arrived at the scene, he was wearing construction shoes, which clearly did not match the Nike shoe prints at the scene. In addition, his shoe size was much larger, and the fingerprints on the glasses did not belong to him. With these facts, the police eliminated him as a suspect. Because Amanda tried to resist, she inflicted injuries on the perpetrator. The perpetrator likely suffered scratches on his body in the first weeks after the crime, as a piece of skin belonging to the perpetrator was found under Amanda's fingernails, an important piece of evidence that the police had hoped for. However, when they tested the DNA sample, they found no match in the database. The motive for the crime remains unclear, as many of the items in Amanda's room were still intact. With no signs of forced entry, the police have two theories as to how the criminals entered the house. Amanda may have known them and let them in, or she may have forgotten to lock the door. Investigators interviewed Amanda's co-workers and friends and discovered that the case may have involved a love triangle. Before dating Seth, Amanda had been in a relationship with someone else, and the breakup was not smooth because Amanda initiated it. After a while, she started dating Seth, and Amanda's ex-boyfriend did not seem to be happy with this. Jealousy sometimes leads people to act rashly with serious consequences. Investigators checked the information but found this theory to be unlikely. Amanda's ex-boyfriend provided his DNA and fingerprints, neither of which matched the traces found on her body or at the scene. Furthermore, he had a convincing alibi. Police investigated other leads but failed to find a solution to Amanda's death, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Amanda's family was determined to find justice, so they distributed flyers and held community events in the hope that someone would come forward with vital information. Amanda's mother, Michelle, said her daughter was not perfect, but she did not understand why Amanda died and why no one had reported any useful information to the police. Amanda's family faced another emotional challenge. They discovered that several police officers had taken photos of Amanda's body on their phones and shared them with others, including civilians. According to an internal report, Sergeant Keith Lame, a senior officer who was in charge of monitoring the scene at 73 School Street, where Amanda was stabbed to death on August 26, 2011, was one of the photographers. He sent the photos from his cell phone to another sergeant, who then forwarded them to a patrol officer. One officer shared the photo with civilians, including a coach at a youth soccer game. Records show that Keith used his cell phone to take the photo. Keith then forwarded the photo to Sergeant Jeffrey Godair. Sergeant Jeffrey emailed the photo to Patrolman Chad Levesque. Patrolman Chad shared the photo of Amanda, lying on the kitchen floor, with other soccer coaches. As he did so, Chad said, "This is something I have to deal with at work." The photo was shown to at least 3 coaches at a youth soccer game in Agawam the day after the murder, according to Captain William Jebb, the internal affairs officer who wrote the report. At that time, Patrolman Terry Deck, who was assigned to record all traffic in the apartment for state police, took a photo of Amanda's body and emailed it separately to 6 Chicopee police officers. The investigation found that all 6 officers deleted the emails. None of them were punished for wrongdoing, and their names were not listed on criminal records. The others were punished for incompetence and failure to meet work standards. Terry and Keith, who took the photos, received letters of reprimand. Jeffrey and Chad were docked wages. Nearly 2 years after the murder, there was no sign that the investigation was any closer to finding the culprit. So investigators decided to review all the relevant evidence, hoping to find some missing information. After reviewing the evidence and items in Amanda's bedroom, they discovered a dry erase board with a suspicious message. The message read, "Dennis was here on November 8th. Interestingly, November 8th was only about 2 weeks before Amanda's body was discovered. Investigators began to wonder about the man named Dennis and his role in the case. They began to investigate the relationship between Dennis and Amanda by examining phone records and social media posts. While investigating Amanda's apartment, police discovered that her ex-boyfriend had given them a crucial clue. He said that Amanda's apartment had been broken into several times during her absence. In particular, Amanda told him that she suspected a young Puerto Rican man whose name began with the letter D. However, she did not want to report the incident to the police and wanted to resolve the situation herself by talking to the man. Amanda tried to talk to the man about the break-in, but he would not listen. Amanda then informed him that a neighbor had witnessed him at her apartment. She also begged him to return items that were missing from her home. However, the man became angry and left. The main goal of the investigators was to identify Dennis and determine whether he was involved in Amanda's death. They discovered that a man named Dennis Rosa Roman lived near where Amanda died. A search of Dennis's records revealed that he had been convicted of burglary and breaking and entering. However, no fingerprints were found that matched the ones found at Amanda's home. Police tracked Dennis to Westfield, Massachusetts, and asked him to come to the police station to talk, but he refused. During the brief encounter, Dennis appeared very nervous. Surprisingly, Dennis turned himself into the police station in November 2013 at the age of 22. Police questioned Dennis about his connection to Amanda. Although Dennis admitted to knowing Amanda from Choppy, he said he had not seen her in several years. This made sense since Amanda had been dead for some time. Investigators then asked him if he had ever been to Amanda's apartment. He replied that he had never been there and did not really know her well. He only admitted that he sometimes sold Amanda marijuana and had had a few brief interactions with her. During questioning, Dennis agreed to provide an oral DNA sample and provided his shoe size. The results showed that his shoe size matched the shoes found at the crime scene. Officers also noted that Dennis was wearing a pair of Nike Air Max shoes, the same type as the shoes found at the scene but with a different sole pattern. After providing his DNA, Dennis refused to answer further questions and promised to return to the police station in a few days to continue the conversation. Because there was insufficient evidence to arrest him, officers were forced to release him. This raised concerns that he might be attempting to flee, causing the investigation to stall. Further investigation revealed that Amanda had been in telephone contact with Dennis on July 28, 2011. She made 4 calls and received 5 calls from him. At the same time, Dennis changed his initial statement to police, admitting that he had spoken to Amanda at times. According to Dennis, Amanda told him that people frequently broke into her apartment when she was away, but she did not report it to the police because nothing of value was missing. However, investigators had heard this story many times before and now suspected Dennis was behind the break-ins. They believed he was hiding something, as his statement changed and lacked a clear explanation. When shown a photo of the dry erase board that read, "Dennis was here on November 8, 11, Dennis suddenly remembered writing it, contradicting his previous statement that he had never been in Amanda's apartment. Additionally, DNA testing revealed that his DNA matched DNA found under Amanda's fingernails and that his fingerprints were on a glass pane at the crime scene. This evidence confirmed Dennis's connection to the crime. After realizing that too much evidence was directly against him, Dennis changed his story again. He now claimed to have been present at the crime scene and tried to save Amanda from the attacker, implying that someone else was involved. When asked about the man's identity, Dennis refused, citing fear for his safety and that of his family. Instead, he provided a detailed description of the alleged perpetrator, a tall, 170 to 200-pound white male with light skin, blue eyes, wearing old pants and dirty boots, along with a t-shirt that read, "Why drink and drive when you can smoke and fly?" Detectives did not believe Dennis's testimony, as all the evidence pointed to only one person being present at the crime scene when Amanda was stabbed. They arrested Dennis and charged him with the murder of Amanda Plass. The trial began in 2016, nearly 3 years later. Dennis's lawyers defended their client, arguing that although he was present at the crime scene, he was not responsible for Amanda's death. They accused the police of mishandling the investigation and framing Dennis after they failed to investigate thoroughly. Dennis claimed that on the day of Amanda's death, the drug dealer forced him to come to her apartment because Amanda owed the dealer $500 or $600. He claimed that the dealer started stabbing Amanda with a knife when things got bad. Dennis claimed that he wanted to intervene but was unable to stop the dealer. Dennis also claimed that Amanda had grabbed his hand, which is why his DNA was found under her fingernails. Prosecutors presented a different version of events. According to them, Dennis broke into Amanda's apartment while she was away and left a note with his name on her whiteboard. Amanda discovered this, suspected Dennis was the culprit, and called him to ask him to return her stolen belongings, which led to 9 phone calls between Amanda and Dennis. Prosecutors claimed that on the day of the murder, Dennis returned to Amanda's apartment thinking she was at work. However, Amanda had come home and a fight broke out, leading to Dennis killing her. A 12-person jury found Dennis guilty of causing the death of Amanda Plass in July 2016, after hearing 8 days of testimony and deliberating for 5 hours. The court sentenced Dennis to life in prison without parole. The police department's internal investigation into the scandal surrounding the release of Amanda's photo was delayed for years. However, in 2018, Officer Jeffrey Gaudier was finally fired in connection with the case. Although he appealed the decision, he returned to work in 2020. Due to his misconduct and previous disciplinary actions, a commission demoted him to patrol officer. Amanda's law went into effect in Massachusetts on August 4, 2022. The law makes it a misdemeanor for first responders to illegally take photos of a crime scene, punishable by up to a year in jail or a $2,000 fine. Amanda's family also filed a lawsuit against the city of Choppy, which was eventually settled out of court for $100,000. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Jessica Patel. Jessica Patel was born on September 16, 1983, in Leeds, West Yorkshire, England, where she grew up in a traditional Hindu community. As the eldest child, she developed a diligent and obedient nature from a young age. Jessica excelled academically, helped with household chores, and maintained a bright and cheerful personality. Jessica had a large social circle, but she was particularly close to a boy 3 years her senior, who was more reserved and shy. They often spent time together, and as Jessica matured, she blossomed into a beautiful young woman. Like many of her peers, she longed to find true love and build a happy family, much like the characters in her favorite movies. However, her romantic aspirations did not detract from her intelligence and determination. To achieve her goals, Jessica pursued higher education. In 2002, she enrolled at De Montfort University in Leicester, and 4 years later, she began studying pharmacy at the University of Manchester. There, she reconnected with Mitesh, an acquaintance who coincidentally attended the same faculty. They initially had no romantic feelings for each other, but over time, it turned into true love. This relationship has helped Mitesh grow and become more confident in himself. He is also accumulating knowledge and becoming more mature. Mitesh was extremely kind and caring towards Jessica, showering her with compliments and gifts. However, their happiness was short-lived. Jessica's mother passed away due to an incurable illness, leaving her devastated. Mitesh stood by Jessica's side, providing emotional support and comfort during this difficult time. As a result, their bond grew stronger. Jessica confided in her sister that she had finally found a trustworthy partner. Mitesh seemed perfect in every way, and she envisioned a happy marriage. In 2008, Mitesh asked Jessica's father for permission to marry her, following traditional Hindu customs. Although her father had reservations about Mitesh and felt that they were too young to get married, Jessica convinced him otherwise. They eventually got married in July 2009. The wedding was held in the beautiful garden of the bride's home. Initially, the newlyweds, Mitesh and Jessica, seemed like a perfect couple. However, things took a turn for the worse soon after. Mitesh's behavior changed dramatically. He became distant and cold, leaving Jessica feeling lonely. Their intimate life also suffered, and they didn't have any physical relationship for about 10 months after their wedding. This was very distressing for Jessica, who couldn't understand why Mitesh's feelings towards her had changed so drastically. Jessica tried to find fault in herself, wondering if she was the reason for Mitesh's change in. Meanwhile, she had just graduated from university in 2010 and was looking forward to starting her career as a pharmacist. She has a good education and a promising career. However, Mitesh's attitude continued to deteriorate. He became increasingly controlling and suspicious, constantly monitoring Jessica's every move. In February, her family suffered another grief. Her grandfather falls ill, his health begins to decline rapidly, and death seems inevitable. Manal's husband does not allow Jessica to spend much time with her family. This was the root of the conflict between they. When Manal confronted her husband about this, he became angry and responded by punching her in the face. As a result, when her grandfather was seriously ill, Jessica was only able to visit him a few times. Jessica comes from a traditional Indian family where his word is the law, restricting her from making her own choices. She felt trapped in a lonely marriage. One day, she confided in her family about her concerns. She expressed her suspicion that her husband, Mitesh, was being unfaithful. She noticed that whenever he received a phone call, he would excuse himself to another room. Additionally, he often stayed up late, spending hours alone, which further fueled her doubts. In 2012, Jessica's suspicions about her husband's infidelity were confirmed when she discovered romantic messages on his phone. Seeking help, she confided in Mitesh's cousin, with whom she had a good relationship. Instead of offering help or advice, the cousin blamed Jessica for her husband's behavior, implying that she was responsible for his infidelity. This response from Mitesh's cousin left Jessica feeling isolated and unsupported. To make matters worse, Mitesh also prohibited her from seeking comfort from her own sisters. It became clear that Mitesh was hiding something and trying to maintain his reputation and authority within the family and local community. In 2014, Mitesh and Jessica relocated to Lynor, a suburb of Middlesbrough in North Yorkshire, in an effort to start anew and distance themselves from their family. They purchased a large house, made renovations, and later opened their own pharmacy. Jessica had hoped that this fresh start would bring positive changes to their relationship. While their relationship did improve slightly, one thing was still missing: children. For 6 years, Jessica struggled with infertility, and Mitesh made veiled threats that he would leave her if she didn't become pregnant. In October 2015, she decided to go through in vitro fertilization. However, the initial attempts were unsuccessful, causing her to become increasingly anxious and depressed, especially with the added stress of hormone treatments. To make matters worse, Mitesh's behavior changed. He became distant and cold towards her at home. He would only show affection in public, and even then, it seemed superficial. He was often preoccupied with his phone, and the tension between them became unbearable. She reached her breaking point and suggested they separate, confessing that she was unhappy in the marriage. Mitesh's response caught her off guard. He claimed to love her and promised that things would improve over time. He even suggested that having a baby would strengthen their family bond. Jessica believed his words. For a moment she felt comforted and listened to, and her doubts subsided. On May 9, 2018, Mitesh and Jessica Patel received the exciting news that 3 of their embryos had been successfully fertilized, with a transfer scheduled for the following month. Jessica was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a mother and eagerly shared the news with her family. Tragically, their happiness was short-lived. A few days later, on the evening of May 14, 2018, Mitesh Patel made a frantic call to the emergency services, reporting that he had found his wife's body at their home. He claimed that he had left the house earlier to buy food and pick up his laptop from work. When he returned home, he found that the house had been burglarized and Jessica was lying unconscious on the living room floor. Mitesh told police that Jessica's skin was cold to the touch and there were bruises on her neck. He was clearly distressed, crying as he spoke. The police assured him that rescuers were on the way. When the officers arrived, they found Jessica's body on the living room floor, her wrists and ankles bound with duct tape. A grocery bag was nearby. Despite the medical team's efforts, Jessica died on the scene. The investigators sought to determine the motive behind the heinous crime. Upon examination, they found that the house had been thoroughly ransacked, with drawers and closets turned upside down. It was evident that the perpetrators had been searching for valuables, as they had even torn apart their bed mattress. The missing jewelry and cash further supported the notion that the primary motive was robbery. Jessica's husband, Mitesh, also believed that their house had been targeted by robbers. According to Mitesh's statement, on the day of the incident, he followed his usual routine, working a morning shift, going to the gym, and returning home afterward. His wife came home around 7 p.m. Later, Mitesh decided to order pizza and left the house at 7:44 p.m. Surveillance footage from a nearby pizzeria corroborated his alibi. Before leaving the pizzeria, he tried to call his wife to tell her he was on his way home, but no one picked up. Mitesh stopped at a pharmacy without notice, so he returned home later than expected. When Mitesh returned home at 8:50 p.m., he was met with a gruesome scene. His wife was bound, and their belongings were scattered everywhere. Neighbors was left reeling after the tragic event. This neighborhood is known as a wealthy and peaceful place, and has never had a crime before. The autopsy report revealed that Jessica's cause of death was strangulation, with the attacker using a bag, bare hands, and an electrical cord to ensure her demise. Since there were no signs of forced entry, investigators initially suspected that Jessica knew her attacker and had let them into the house. Jessica's family quickly arrived and comforted Mitesh, who appeared to be extremely sad and lost over the passing of his wife. However, the police had their suspicions, and a thorough search of the house uncovered some crucial clues that would eventually lead to the capture and trial of the perpetrator. A health monitoring app on Jessica's phone also played an important role in finding the truth. 3 days after Jessica's murder, the lead investigator contacted her father, who was still near the crime scene, and asked him and other relatives to return home so as not to interfere with the ongoing investigation. The investigator promised to provide more information later. Meanwhile, detectives were preparing to arrest the prime suspect in the case, Mitesh Patel. Several key pieces of evidence had led them to this conclusion. During the search of the crime scene, police found a damaged hard drive from a surveillance camera installed in front of the front door. The device was discovered in a suitcase under the bed. Further investigation uncovered a hidden photograph in their nightstand that showed Mitesh embracing another man, named Amit. Additionally, footage from a camera across the street revealed that only Mitesh and Jessica entered and exited their home on the day of the murder, May 14th. The footage shows that Mitesh returned home at 3:30 p.m. Jessica arrived home from work at 7 p.m., and Mitesh left the house briefly to pick up pizza at 7:44 p.m., returning at 8:50 p.m. Since no one else was seen entering or leaving the house, the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Mitesh was the likely perpetrator. Mitesh was the prime suspect in the investigation, but the police lacked concrete evidence against him. As the detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking secret that Mitesh had carefully kept hidden. Jessica had suspected that her husband was being unfaithful, and her instincts were correct. However, it was not what she expected. Mitesh was hiding his true sexual orientation. His marriage to Jessica was just a cover, a way to hide his true feelings for other men. 2 years into their marriage, Mitesh met Amit, an Indian man who was openly gay. Despite their cultural differences, they men quickly fell in love and secretly met each other whenever Mitesh was away on business. Unbeknownst to Jessica, her husband was leading a double life, pretending to be the perfect spouse while carrying on an illicit affair. In 2016, Amit moved to Australia, but Amit and Mitesh continued their relationship. Mitesh had had a plan to become same-sex parents with Amit by using Jessica's embryos and finding a surrogate. Mitesh had informed Amit that Jessica was having in vitro fertilization, IVF, and had asked if they could be together after this plan, to which Amit had replied that it would depend on the results. Mitesh confided in Amit, stating that eventually there would be no more obstacles in their relationship. In a message, Mitesh chillingly wrote, "Jessica's days are numbered." It was later discovered that Mitesh was secretly taking fertility-affecting medication to avoid intimate relations with Jessica. The investigation revealed that Mitesh's internet search history was reconstructed. He had searched for "how to get rid of his wife," Hindu funeral, and procedure for obtaining insurance payments for the murder of a spouse. Notably, Jessica had a £2 million life insurance policy. After her death, Mitesh planned to claim the money and use it to buy a property in Australia. In the weeks leading up to Jessica's death, Mitesh had been actively searching for a new home, aiming to create a comfortable environment for his future family. Investigators analyzed their cell phones and found incriminating messages. They also discovered a fitness app that tracked the number of steps taken by Jessica's. The data showed that Jessica's phone had not moved since 8:04 p.m. However, 15 minutes later, the phone recorded 14 steps, suggesting that either Jessica had made her last movements or someone had moved the device. In contrast, Mitesh's phone data revealed high physical activity and an elevated heart rate in the period leading up to his wife's murder, which was unusual for him. Between 7:44 p.m. and 8:30 p.m., Jessica's husband, Mitesh, walked up and down the stairs multiple times, creating false evidence of a burglary by throwing objects around the house. Before calling 911, he went upstairs to conceal evidence, including a hard drive from a surveillance camera in the safe of the pharmacy he and his wife owned. During the police investigation, they found stolen jewelry, £25,000, and a couple of gold bars, which Mitesh claimed had been taken during the robbery. They also discovered a roll of duct tape similar to the one used to bind the victim's arms and legs. The torn end of the tape matched the piece taken as evidence from Jessica's body. To create an alibi, Mitesh had to go to his workplace the evening after the pizza party. Despite planning for years, he was remarkably careless and left a trail of evidence behind. Furthermore, DNA analysis found under Jessica's fingernails showed that it matched Mitesh's DNA. Mitesh had scratch marks on his neck, which he attributed to a fall. During the investigation and subsequent trial, Mitesh, the accused, denied any wrongdoing. He claimed that his interactions with Jessica were mere coincidence. The 3-week trial strung together the developments in the case. It was established that he attacked his wife as soon as she entered the house. She fought back and scratched the attacker but was eventually controlled. Initially, Mitesh had planned to kill his wife by administering a lethal dose of insulin. However, this method takes a long time to be effective and there is a risk that the plan will be discovered. To ensure a quicker outcome, Mitesh suffocated his wife by putting a bag over her head. To make sure his wife was dead, he strangled her with his hands and then used a rope. The prosecution presented physical evidence, including empty ampules found in Mitesh Patel's laptop bag, which linked him to the crime. Mitesh brutally murdered his wife, Jessica, in their home, a place they had shared for years. The entire ordeal took only 20 minutes. He then brutally tied her up to create the appearance that she had been robbed. Following the murder, Mitesh went about his day as usual, even stopping at a pizza place and calling Jessica's phone. The news of her death left both families in shock and disbelief. Tragically, Jessica had been seeking help in the months leading up to her murder, but her cries for aid were ignored. Only her sister seemed worried, but they couldn't do much to help either. The jury deliberated for 2 hours before delivering a guilty verdict. On December 5, 2018, the court sentenced Mitesh Patel to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Mitesh showed no remorse for his actions, and it seemed that the only person he felt sorry for was himself. The family was still grappling with the loss of Jessica's death, remembering her in their daily prayers and cherishing the happy moments they had shared together. It is unlikely that they will ever forgive Mitesh for his heinous crime. According to Hindu beliefs, her soul must be reborn. Since she suffered a lot in life and was unhappy but remained a good person, in the next incarnation, she will be rewarded. At least that was a comfort to her loved ones. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Smith family. George Smith was born and raised in Greenwich, Connecticut. He came from a close-knit, caring family, an environment that nurtured his intelligence. His father, George Smith Sr., owned the liquor store in the town, which was not just a job, but a passion that brought him joy. George Smith pursued higher education in business at Babson College in Massachusetts and graduated in 2000. After completing his studies, he worked in Boston as a data mining analyst for several years. However, he realized that his true passion was helping his family in the business. In 2005, George made the conscious decision to return home to learn the basics of business from his family's store. His goal was to one day take over the business, allowing his parents to retire and enjoy the fruits of their labor. In 2002, at a reunion with old friends, George Smith met Jennifer. She, a Connecticut native who had just found work as an elementary school teacher, would later become his life partner. George was immediately attracted to her beautiful appearance, open personality, and strong ambition, and they quickly fell deeply in love. George's parents also welcomed Jennifer with open arms. 3 years later, in 2005, when George was 26, they decided to tie the knot and start a new life together. Their picturesque wedding ceremony was held right on the beach at the Castle Hill Inn, Newport, Rhode Island. Nai sao bui lu, cap doi moi koi de tan hong tuan trang mat xa hoa kio de 12 gay tren du Thuyen Royal Caribbean. Their journey began in Barcelona on June 29, with stops in France's Côte d'Azur and along Italy's coast. On board, George and Jennifer befriended another couple and a young man named Josh Askin from California. Josh Askin, a 20 years old with a great sense of humor, quickly became friends with George. The group had a great time together. On July 1st, when the ship docked off the Italian coast, they decided to spend the day on land. July 4th, they explored the island, wandering through the narrow streets of the old town, swimming in the crystal-clear Aegean Sea, and sampling local cuisine in quaint taverns. They were carefree and happy, enjoying each other's company and the island's beauty. The group left Mykonos with unforgettable memories and planned to continue the fun on the ship's deck that evening. After a romantic dinner, George and Jennifer rejoined their friends on the ship. The group decided to get together and enjoy a good time together, laugh and create memories of their vacation. The evening was filled with laughter and excitement. After enjoying appetizers and drinks, the newlyweds, accompanied by Josh Askin, headed to the ship Ciaschino to continue the fun. George and Josh Askin spent their evening enjoying a game of craps, while Jennifer had fun playing poker at a nearby table. As the night came to a close, the newlyweds had lost a substantial amount of money, but they joked about it lightheartedly, unbothered by their losses. After the Ciaschino closed, they decided to keep the party going. Later, around 2:30 a.m. on June 5, 2005, security cameras on the Greek island of Mykonos caught footage of George leaving the Ciaschino, but it remains unclear whether he returned to his cabin afterwards. George Smith, a 26-year-old newlywed, is on his honeymoon with his wife Jennifer. They is having a fantastic time together, soaking up the lively atmosphere and entertainment on board. However, their enjoyable evening suddenly takes a mysterious turn. Upon investigating the incident, the ship's captain searched George's cabin, finding unusual footprints under the window, as well as evidence of a disturbance on deck. George was missing, and footprints at the scene suggested there may have been a struggle, raising doubts about George's safety. The sudden disappearance of the newlywed couple spread quickly, causing passengers on the ship to become worried and scared. The crew cordoned off Deck 7 and restricted access to cabins while they searched for George and Jennifer. After finding blood, it was presumed that they had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The senior officer took charge of the investigation and went to their stateroom to gather more information. Based on the evidence, it was suspected that George might have fallen overboard. Meanwhile, the search for they continued on the other side of the ship. By 10 a.m., Jennifer was found in a ship spa, where she was receiving a pre-booked massage. She looked surprised and worried, claiming she had no idea where her husband was and hadn't seen him since the previous night. According to Jennifer, she woke up and found George not there, but she thought he was with friends or in another cabin. She then went to her spa appointment without giving his absence a second thought. At noon, Turkish authorities boarded the ship to investigate the disappearance of George. The captain reassured passengers that the investigation was necessary to understand what happened and hoped it would end quickly. The police began by questioning George's wife, Jennifer, who was visibly agitated and seemed to have limited information about her husband's disappearance. Jennifer told the police that she had last seen George the previous night and that Royal Caribbean staff had informed her that he may have fallen overboard. The discovery of blood on the boat's awning suggests that something terrible has happened to George. As a result, Jennifer became the main suspect due to her agitated state and apparent lack of knowledge about her husband's disappearance. The investigators then examined cabin 962, which was found to be in disarray, suggesting a possible struggle. In the bathroom, they discovered small drops of blood on the carpet and towel, as well as fingerprints on the balcony railing. Furthermore, 2 small blood stains, each approximately 2 centimeters long, were found on the bedding. The blood samples were later identified as belonging to George. George's disappearance from the cabin remains a mystery, and all evidence points to the fact that he experienced trauma before he disappeared. A chair on the balcony, positioned to allow someone to sit next to the railing, caught the investigators' attention. Marks on the railing suggested someone had indeed sat there, sparking suspicion that George might have fallen. However, the high railing and bloodstains on the boat's awning and inside the cabin hinted at a more sinister scenario: murder. Investigators have been trying to determine who George was with that night, and what may have led to his disappearance. The inquiry was in its early stages, but it was already clear that the case was complex and fraught with mysteries. The Turkish authorities boarded the ship to investigate George Smith's disappearance. They began by questioning the group of friends with whom the newlyweds had spent the previous night. As the investigation remained shrouded in mystery, every detail was crucial. They reported that George and Jennifer had consumed excessive alcohol, leading to George's intoxication. They claimed to have helped him back to the cabin, put him to bed, and removed his shoes before leaving him alone. However, they were unable to account for Jennifer's whereabouts and assumed she had returned to the cabin later. Notably, Josh Askin's testimony contained inconsistencies. He alleged that Jennifer had left the group to go with a casino employee named Lloyd, contradicting the assumption that she had returned to the cabin. Josh Askin and Jennifer have deep feelings for each other, and they have both openly expressed their feelings for George. However, when reviewing the security footage, the story is different. At 3:30 a.m., the footage showed Jennifer leaving with new friends, while George stayed behind. Furthermore, data from Lloyd's keycard indicated that he returned to his cabin at 3:25 a.m., a fact confirmed by his girlfriend. This new information raised more questions and led investigators to suspect that Joshua Skin may have been hiding some crucial details. As the investigation continues, each new revelation added more mystery to the story. On a different part of the ship, a young man named Greg Rosenberg was enjoying a family cruise with friends, including his cousin Zach Rosenberg and close friend Rostislav Kaufman. The three men, who all held American passports despite their Russian heritage, lived in New York City. Greg Rosenberg and Jennifer had started their evening at the casino, trying their luck at poker together. After the casino closed at 2:30 a.m., they joined their friends and decided to continue the party. The group headed to the ship's disco, where they danced and drank together, enjoying each other's company. Lloyd Bota, the casino manager, was also seen having a good time with the young men. The witnesses' accounts of the nighttime activities start to conflict with one another as the group members disperse to their cabins. It was already late, and they were visibly intoxicated. According to the ship's rules, passengers who were loud and behaved inappropriately would have their drink delivery blocked. When the staff refused to serve they drunk visitors, they remembered they had a bottle of absinthe they had bought on the island of Mykonos. However, the crew had forbidden passengers from consuming their own alcohol on board. Joshua Skin returned to his cabin to retrieve a special bottle of wormwood wine that he said he had purchased earlier. It was later discovered that this absinthe was exceptionally strong, with an alcohol concentration of over 70%, making it one of the strongest drinks available. George decided to help his friend by hiding the bottle of absinthe in his shorts. However, an observant janitor noticed something unusual. A group of young men, including Greg, Zach, Rostislav, Joshua Skin, and George, were drinking from the bottle. This incident was added to the investigation. That evening, not only the men were intoxicated. Jennifer, at first very alert and calm, then showed signs of intoxication. She began to stagger and at one point, leaned on Lloyd, the casino manager. Some thought she was trying to regain her balance, while others interpreted it as flirting. What happened next between Jennifer and George remains unclear. According to eyewitness accounts, they got into an argument, but it's unknown if they were joking or serious. At some point, Jennifer hit George, and it's unclear if it was playful or out of anger. Jennifer left the disco around 3:30 a.m., visibly intoxicated and stumbling. George stayed behind with his new friends. The staff's testimony was crucial in uncovering what happened next. Jennifer's unsteady walk caught the attention of the janitor, who had seen her and her friends drinking earlier. He helped her to the elevator and watched her turn right when she reached her deck. However, this is where the story takes a confusing turn. Her stateroom was on the left, but she headed in the opposite direction. Jennifer was found asleep in a hallway far from her room. 2 guards and a female duty officer used a wheelchair to return her to her quarters. When they arrived, the clock read 4:52 a.m. But her husband George was not there. The curtains on the balcony doors were closed tightly and remained still despite the breeze, raising questions about whether George had gone out to the balcony on his own after his friends left him in bed. Deputy Chief of Police Chit Hyman and his wife were in a neighboring cabin. They were awakened at 4 a.m. by a noise and heard loud sounds coming from George's stateroom, number 9062. Chit Hyman reported the noise to guest services and also yelled through the wall to try to quiet the disturbance. The noise stopped briefly, but then loud talking resumed for about 3 minutes. An argument on the balcony followed, during which someone said, "Good night," repeatedly, as if trying to make people leave. After that, there were sounds of furniture being moved, and finally a loud thud, like something had fallen. Chit Hyman decided to investigate a disturbance and opened the door to find 3 unidentified men. Other passengers also reported hearing a loud noise that sounded like a body hitting the boat's canopy, followed by a woman's scream. However, none of the eyewitnesses had conclusive evidence that a woman was inside the cabin at the time. According to witnesses, 4 young men entered the cabin, but only 3 of them were visible when they exited. This raised the question of whether one of them might have stayed inside to search for money from the newlywed couple, who had recently won a significant amount at the casino. The theory of a failed robbery attempt seems plausible, but there are inconsistencies in the alibis of the 3 boys, Greg, Zach, and Rostislav. They claim to have been in another stateroom just minutes after Heyman saw the 3 unknown men. The key card records for George's stateroom confirm that they entered it at 4:05 a.m., but there is no record of them entering the cabin again. This has led to several theories about what might have happened to George Smith. Another theory suggests that George and Jennifer's drunkenness was not simply due to excessive alcohol consumption. Although they appeared relatively sober when they left the casino at 2:30 a.m., they were unable to return to their cabin on their own by 3:30 a.m., implying possible exposure to illicit substances. This idea is supported by the testimony of other casino visitors, who reported that George and Jennifer openly discussed having large sums of money, possibly from wedding gifts or casino winnings. Estimates of their wealth varied, but all witnesses agreed it was in the tens of thousands of dollars. The fact that George wore an expensive Breitling watch and Jennifer owned a valuable engagement ring further suggested they were wealthy. It's possible that their quarters were targeted by thieves searching for the money they had been boasting about. 2 possible explanations have been proposed for the disappearance of George. The first theory suggests that the kidnapper may have injured George while trying to remove his valuable watch, resulting in bloodstains on the sheet. The second theory focuses on the effects of alcohol and hallucinogens. After discovering that the passengers had been drinking and finding footprints on the balcony, the captain suspected that an accidental fall overboard might have occurred during a scuffle. Particular attention has been paid to hallucinations caused by drinking wormwood wine, a beverage containing the active ingredient thujone. However, toxicology experts note that the concentration of thujone plays a crucial role in determining its effects. Importantly, absinthe sold in European countries today is strictly regulated, and the thujone concentration is limited to such a low level that it is incapable of causing hallucinations. The fact that the George actually purchased the wormwood wine in Europe makes it unlikely that it caused the hallucinations, as experts claim that the amount of alcohol required to produce such hallucinations would have to be extremely large. In reality, only black market absinthe with a much higher concentration could potentially cause hallucinations. In the investigation into George Smith's disappearance, the FBI conducted polygraph interviews with Jennifer and Lloyd Bota, and who both passed. However, Joshua Skin failed the polygraph, which may suggest that he is hiding something about George's disappearance. The investigation into George's mysterious death uncovered a significant piece of evidence, a videotape featuring 3 individuals, including Russians, making jokes about an incident. The FBI agents reviewed this tape, and a particular comment made by one of the men, "We gave him a lesson in paragliding without a parachute," suggests a potential connection to George's case. During the investigation in 2009, FBI agents interviewed Greg, Zach, Rostislav, and Joshua Skin as witnesses. However, Zach Rosenberg and Joshua Skin declined to provide a direct answer. Their answers remained vague, implying that they did not want to share full details of what happened. Another crucial witness was Greg Rosenberg, who was with the group of men entertaining on the night of the incident. He claimed they ordered food to their cabin that evening, providing a possible alibi for the Russian men. Nevertheless, inconsistencies were found in this statement. However, this information is incorrect. According to the ship's service records, their cabin was blocked from service that day. Staff were also specifically instructed not to serve the group that evening. Greg could not confidently say which passenger in the cabin had ordered food. Witnesses offered differing opinions on the nature of George and Jennifer's relationship, citing various observations and recollections. Greg believed it was challenging to gauge the quality of their relationship due to the group's heavy drinking. According to him, everyone in the group was extremely intoxicated, making it hard to determine the specifics of their interactions. There was a discrepancy in testimony as to whether Greg left the cabin immediately after ordering food. Josh Askin provided information that Greg left the cabin after ordering food. However, Greg denied this statement, saying that he never left. This contradiction complicated the investigation, requiring further investigation to establish the facts. In December 2019, Greg Rosenberg was murdered, and the case remains unsolved. Investigators are exploring a potential connection between his death and that of George Smith. The mysterious circumstances surrounding George Smith's appearance have raised significant questions about his background and family. As details emerged, the situation grew increasingly complicated, with the actions of his relatives following the tragedy drawing scrutiny from both the public and law enforcement. The George family persisted in seeking answers and justice regarding George's disappearance. The case was moved from the FBI's Connecticut office to the New York office. The family offered a $100,000 reward for any information that could help identify and bring to justice those responsible for the crime. They also called for a boycott of the shipping company, which they believed was trying to cover up the incident to protect its profits. The incident also strained the relationship between George's parents and his young wife, Jennifer. Her behavior was closely scrutinized and many found her composure suspicious. She said she was acting on the orders of FBI agents, doing exactly as they told her. However, her hesitation to provide more information sparked suspicion. The George family, who were seeking truth and justice, became disheartened when Jennifer agreed to a $1 million settlement offer from the judgment company. This move appeared to them as a betrayal. They felt the Turkish authorities' investigation lacked transparency, and Jennifer seemed too hasty in accepting the offer, fueling their suspicions that she was concealing information and wasn't invested in uncovering the truth. In contrast, Jennifer says she has very few memories of what happened after 2:30 a.m. that night, unaware that the liner's staff had even found her in the corridor and escorted her back to her cabin. This satisfied with the Turkish investigation. The George family to take matters into their own hands by engaging independent forensic scientist Henry Lee to assist them. Henry Lee conducted a series of studies in the cabin and on the balcony that were not included in the official investigation. These studies could have revealed crucial information about the events surrounding George's death and potentially confirmed one of their main theories: murder or accident. According to Henry Lee, the height of the balcony makes it unclear whether George's fall was an accident or not. It is possible that a third party pushed him or that he was in a state of insanity and climbed onto a chair before falling. Henry Lee had planned to conduct an experiment to simulate a fall from the balcony, but the cruise line owner refused to allow it. George's relatives believe that this decision was made to obstruct their efforts to uncover the truth. Henry Lee also conducted investigations in the cabin, on the balcony, and on the boat, but the results of these investigations were not made public. Meanwhile, the FBI launched its own investigation, but many of its findings and discoveries were kept secret. The FBI's investigation into George Smith's disappearance focused on 4 young men who spent the night with him, as well as 3 Russians: Greg, Zach Rosenberg, and Rostislav Kaufman. However, their testimonies were inconsistent with those of other witnesses, adding to the mystery and confusion surrounding the case. Initially, Jennifer was a suspect, but she was eventually cleared of suspicion. The family then increased the amount of their lawsuit against the company and used the payout to secure the release of the investigation's results, including witness statements and other relevant information. Jennifer was left to cherish the memories of George and dedicated herself to charitable work in his honor. She later remarried, continuing to strive to make a positive impact in his memory. The FBI launched an extensive investigation into George Smith's disappearance, but it was ultimately unable to uncover the truth about his fate or recover his body. Due to lack of evidence, the case was eventually closed, and his death was officially classified as an accident. George's family continues to seek answers about the circumstances surrounding his death, and not being able to visit his grave and pay their respects is the greatest suffering for them. They remain hopeful that the truth will eventually come to light, bringing closure to the case. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sheil Coughlin. Sheil Coughlin grew up on the west side of Manhattan. Shelley's life was marked by a love of learning and academic excellence, earning a degree in wealth management. This degree opened the door to a successful career in Swiss banking. Sheil's career flourished, and she became skilled at managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for her clients. However, despite her professional success and financial security, Sheil felt unfulfilled. She longed to start a family of her own and become a mother. In an effort to change her circumstances, Sheil attended a Jewish singles event in February 1998, where she met a 26-year-old man named Rod Coughlin, who also worked in the banking sector. Sheil and Rod were a young couple with many similar interests and ambitions. Their relationship developed quickly despite their significant age difference. They spent all their time together and then decided to get married, feeling that everything was just right. Some people thought they were rushing into marriage, but for Sheil and Rod, it was perfect. They had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, and their family was complete. However, their happy life was shattered on New Year's Eve 2009 when Sheil died in a tragic accident. At first, the police thought it was just a freak accident. On December 30th, 2009, 2 police officers were finishing their night shift at a Manhattan police station. They received an emergency call from Rod Coughlin, Sheil's husband, who had called in a panic to report that he had found Sheil in her bathtub, submerged in blood, and that she was dead. He followed the police's instructions to pull her out of the water and attempt to resuscitate her. However, it soon became clear that his efforts to save her life would not be successful. As Sheil's body was cold and motionless, Rod Coughlin covered her with a blanket and waited for the police to arrive. Police quickly arrived and investigated the scene. Upon arrival, they assessed the situation and blocked off a downtown Manhattan street. Initially, officers suspected that Sheil's death may have been a suicide. Inside the apartment, the police found scattered children's toys. Proceeding to the bathroom, they discovered the Sheil wrapped in a blanket by her husband. The bloody water in the tub and the wet floor indicated that Rod Coughlin had recently pulled the body from the water. A bleeding wound on the back of Sheil's head was visible. Police found a torn hinge on the cabinet in the bathroom where Sheil died, suggesting she fell after losing her grip on the doorknob. Experts concluded there was no forced entry after checking around the house. The detective working the case decided to talk to the family members. During the interview, it was discovered that Sheil and Rod Coughlin's 9-year-old daughter was the first to discover her mother's body. Traumatized and shocked by what she saw, she told the police what had happened. It turned out that the night before, she and her younger brother had slept in their mother's bed. Waking up in the middle of the night and realizing that her mother was not there, she went looking for her and stumbled upon the horrifying scene in the bathroom. She quickly called her father, Rod Coughlin, who had recently separated from his mother and was downstairs. He rushed into the bathroom, pulled his wife's body out of the water, and called emergency services. Her account of the events matched Rod Coughlin's, supporting the theory that her death was an accident. The police informed Sheil's family of the tragic event, leaving everyone in shock. An autopsy and forensic examination were scheduled for the following day. When the medical examiner contacted investigators to begin the examination, he was surprised to learn that this procedure would not take place, despite being necessary. This left the examiner confused. It was later discovered that a rabbi from Sheil's synagogue had intervened. The rabbi contacted an organization responsible for burying Orthodox Jews, who then asked the police for permission to enter the scene in accordance with the family's religious rites. The police granted permission and a team of rabbis arrived at the scene. They cleaned up the blood in the bathtub and prepared Sheil's body for burial in accordance with the family's beliefs. Unfortunately, this process destroyed all evidence and clues before they could be examined by the police forensic department. Orthodox Jewish tradition considers autopsies unacceptable because they involve defiling the body of the deceased. The rabbi quickly stepped in to support Sheil's grieving family, who were grateful for the rabbi's help. As a result, the family agreed to forego an autopsy and organize funeral arrangements. Sheil was buried within 24 hours, with hundreds of people attending to pay their respects. Sheil's parents questioned the cause of Sheil's death. Police told them that potential evidence had been destroyed during the cleanup. They thought that a fall in the bathtub would certainly have caused the accident. But the possibility of death from such an accident seemed unlikely. The family hired a private investigator to investigate the circumstances of her death and determine whether it was indeed an accident. The private investigator begins by going to the family home to talk to Sheil's relatives, and learns that Sheil's marriage to Rod Kovlin is having major problems. Their marriage began to fall apart after their 10th wedding anniversary in 2008. Rod Kovlin frequently changed jobs and developed a gambling addiction, spending a lot of money on gambling. Sheil felt neglected because Rod Kovlin spent a lot of time playing video games. Sheil was also frustrated by the amount of money Rod Kovlin's family spent on his frequent trips, and he was unfaithful to her. Sheil, after discovering his email cheating, she decided to end their marriage and began the process of getting a religious divorce. However, the formal divorce process will take some time to complete. Although they are separated and experiencing strain in their relationship, they has tried to maintain their relationship for the sake of their children. Despite this effort, conflicts and disagreements between Sheil and Rod Kovlin continued to arise. Sheil had recently confided in her loved ones about her grievances with Rod Kovlin, characterizing him as aggressive and hot-tempered. She felt uneasy and monitored. The private detective suspected that Rod Kovlin might have been involved in his wife Sheil's death due to the complexities in their marital life. To investigate further, the detective aimed to determine if a crime had occurred at the scene where Sheil's body was found. He planned to inspect her apartment, but the door was sealed, requiring him to obtain a court order to gain access. Upon arriving at the scene with New York police officers, the detective attempted to unlock the door with a provided key, but it wouldn't budge. Just then, Rod Kovlin appeared from his apartment, claiming he had heard a noise and came to investigate. When questioned by the police and the detective, Rod Kovlin took the key and easily opened the door. This raised suspicions. Had Rod Kovlin genuinely heard a noise, or was he deliberately keeping an eye on the situation? The detective searched the apartment for evidence of murder. Sheil's family said she was home on December 31st, but her phone was missing. A phone charger was found, but not the phone that he paid particular attention to the hinges, which investigators believed she had ripped off during a fall. The more he examined them, the more he suspected that, with Sheil's strength, ripping off hinges that were firmly attached to the cabinet was impossible. The detective discussed his findings with the police, trying to convince them that Sheil's death was not an accident, but a murder. However, the police remained unconvinced, citing a lack of evidence. Therefore, they decided to perform an autopsy to conclusively determine the cause of death. This decision caused a difficult debate with Sheil's family. The exhumation took place 2 weeks after Sheil had been buried. Her loved ones were deeply distressed by the decision. In the Jewish faith, exhumation is considered negative and many religious leaders oppose the practice. The family needed time to think about their next steps. They felt the need to find out the truth about their daughter's death, so they agreed to exhume her body. However, the exhumation process was difficult, so the family had to apply for a special order from the prosecutor's office. Even with the family's consent, they still had to make sure that all the necessary paperwork was completed. Once all the paperwork was completed, they proceeded with the exhumation and autopsy. The autopsy results showed that she did not die from a fall, but from strangulation, which caused her to suffocate and break her neck. The official cause of Sheil's death was revised, and it was no longer considered an accident. Instead, it was officially ruled a murder. The detective's suspicions and efforts were vindicated. The autopsy results were instrumental in prompting the New York Police Department to reopen the investigation into Sheil's death. Detectives began scrutinizing new evidence, including phone records and bank statements. They also interviewed everyone who had interacted with Rod Coughlin and Sheil. The attorney shared information about Rod Coughlin and Sheil during the first divorce hearing in May 2009. Rod Coughlin claimed that he could not afford the money because he was unemployed, but the judge said that he had to give up gambling and electronics. In court, Rod Coughlin's true nature was exposed, and he continued to criticize Sheil, making false accusations about her lifestyle, finances, and behavior toward their son. He even called Sheil's workplace to defame her. In the subsequent divorce hearing on July 7, 2009, the court banned Rod Coughlin from spending time alone with the children, a ban that remained in place even after Sheil's death. The court also denied Rod Coughlin custody of the children and awarded custody to Rod Coughlin's parents through a social worker. This decision likely angered Rod Coughlin greatly. Police interviewed a former caregiver who had cared for Rod Coughlin's children before he fired her. It was discovered that on December 30th, Sheil had received an expensive keratin hair treatment that cost hundreds of dollars. The care instructions emphasized avoiding humidity in high temperatures for several days, essentially prohibiting baths or showers. Sheil's autopsy revealed no signs of bathing on the day of her death, leading investigators to speculate that she may not have taken a bath. Detectives reviewed surveillance footage from the building, which showed Rod Coughlin leaving his apartment at 4 a.m. on the day of the murder, dressed to go out. He returned a short time later. The building's security guard found this unusual, as Rod had never left the building that early. The security guard asked Rod Coughlin if he needed anything, but when he said no, Rod Coughlin returned with the chocolate bars and gave them to the security guard. Investigators believed that Rod Coughlin's actions were intentional to create an alibi, and as a result, he became the prime suspect. Sheil and Rod Coughlin were still married, which meant that absent a will or divorce, Rod Coughlin would inherit her estate, which was worth over $5 million. Additionally, on December 31, 2009, Sheil scheduled a meeting with her attorney to update her will and remove Rod Coughlin from the list of beneficiaries, which posed a significant threat to Rod Coughlin's rights and provided a clear motive for the crime. All of Sheil's assets were frozen in a safe deposit account. It is likely that Rod Coughlin knew about Sheil's plans to remove his name from her will, as he may have been monitoring her activities. A review of the surveillance footage revealed that Sheil had returned home at 8 p.m. the night before the crime, talking on her phone. However, the phone had gone missing after the crime. The investigators decided to conduct another search of the crime scene, and upon returning to the apartment, they quickly found Sheil's mobile phone lying on her bedside table, still connected to the charger. When questioned by the police, Rod Coughlin hired a lawyer, Ed, who advised him to remain silent. As a result, investigators had to continue searching for new evidence implicating Rod Coughlin. When they examined Rod Coughlin's phone records, they discovered frequent calls to the number of Deborah Holmes, a married woman with 3 children. 5 months before Sheil's murder, Rod Coughlin and Deborah met at a sick bow tournament and began a passionate affair. They often met at sick bow tournaments or played together online. Investigators saw an opportunity to gather information and decided to contact Deborah with a few questions. However, to their surprise, Deborah responded that her attorney had asked her not to cooperate. Faced with Deborah's refusal to speak, the police asked for the name of her attorney. The response revealed that Deborah and Rod Coughlin were the same attorney. As a last resort, the police searched Shields' newly discovered phone for incriminating text messages or electronic communications between Rod and Deborah. All data had been completely erased by a professional. Even skilled programmers were unable to recover the deleted messages. Over time, it became clear that he had succeeded in evading justice. While his crimes may have been well executed, the rabbi's meticulous cleaning of the bathroom was a major factor in hampering the investigation. By removing all traces of blood and other evidence, they destroyed DNA, making it increasingly difficult for investigators to collect evidence. The case stalled because Rod Coughlin confessed to the crime, and a lack of evidence prevented the case from going to trial. 5 years have passed since the investigation into Shields' death began, but no arrests have been made. Police have searched for clues and evidence of Rod Coughlin's involvement in Shields' death for years, but to no avail. However, the case took a turn when Rod Coughlin's mistress, Deborah, came forward. She contacted the police, and they invited her to the station for questioning. Deborah had recently broken up with Rod Coughlin, which prompted her to contact the police. She shared information with the police that Rod Coughlin had conspired to gain custody of the children, but because he was a suspect in Shields' death and did not have custody of the children, he could not access the money Shield left behind. Rod Coughlin hatched a sinister plan to get his hands on Shields' fortune. Rod Coughlin planned to manipulate his 15-year-old daughter into falsely accusing her grandfather, Rod Coughlin's father, of assaulting her. This would result in the grandfather being imprisoned and losing custody of his granddaughter, and Rod Coughlin would give his daughter a large sum of money upon completion of the mission. Meanwhile, Rod Coughlin had been secretly withdrawing funds from the only account he had access to, which was meant for his children's education. His parents discovered that he was misusing the money and were extremely unhappy with his lack of concern for his children's well-being. This led to a heated dispute between Rod Coughlin and his parents. Rod Coughlin's anger towards his parents escalated to the point where he considered harming them. In 2012, he confided in his lover, Deborah, about his plan to have his daughter poison his parents' tea with rat poison. He believed that since his daughter was a minor, she would receive a lighter sentence if caught. Following this, Rod Coughlin came up with several other schemes. He considered burning down his parents' house and trapping them inside by jamming the doors. Rod Coughlin also thought about arranging a fake marriage for his daughter to a Mexican man, which would have forced her to give up part of her inheritance to him. The police were shocked by the details of Rod Coughlin's plans. Deborah secretly collected evidence, storing a large amount of data on hard drives. Deborah realized she was dealing with a psychopath, and she waited until after she broke up with Rod Coughlin to share the evidence with the police. The recordings she collected of Rod Coughlin's conversations with various people. The police now had to listen carefully to these recordings to find conclusive evidence. Deborah's contribution to the investigation was crucial. As the investigators analyzed the recordings, they made a surprising discovery. In a conversation with a friend he met through backgammon, Rod Coughlin casually mentioned that he had keys to Shields' apartment and could enter it at any time. Investigators found that Rod Coughlin was plotting against his own daughter, planning to pin the responsibility for the Shields' demise on her. Thanks to all the information gathered, the police finally had compelling evidence to charge Rod Coughlin with the demise of his wife. On November 1, 2015, Rod Coughlin was arrested. Shields' family awaited the trial of their daughter's perpetrator, but victory was not assured. Rod Coughlin, while incarcerated, shared intimate details of his wife's murder with a fellow inmate. He even reenacted the strangulation, which matched the autopsy results. During the 7-week trial, the jury heard testimony about the heinous crimes he planned to commit, including murdering his wife, targeting his parents, and framing his own children. The jury was horrified by his cold-blooded nature. In March 2019, the court convicted Rod Coughlin of murdering his wife, Sheil. Although there was no direct eyewitness, the overwhelming evidence led to a life imprisonment sentence. With the possibility of parole after 25 years, Rod Coughlin will no longer pose a threat to his family or the people of New York. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Debbie Lynn Randall. Debbie Lynn Randall was born on August 21, 1962, in Marietta, Georgia, to a loving family with 2 older brothers. Her parents divorced when she was young. Her mother later married a man named Roy, who became Debbie's stepfather. The family lived in a small apartment building. Debbie was a cheerful and sociable child. On the evening of January 13, 1972, after dinner with her family, Debbie went to the laundromat to supervise the laundry. Debbie's home was just a short distance from the laundromat, so her mother wasn't overly concerned about her safety when she was sent to do the laundry. The original plan was for Debbie to go with her brother, but he was feeling unwell, so Debbie's mother sent her husband to pick up the laundry and Debbie went with her stepfather, holding a box of laundry detergent. At the laundromat, Roy put the clothes in 2 washing machines and left, leaving Debbie waiting for the cycle to finish. After the wash, Debbie had to walk home and ask someone to pick up her clean clothes because she couldn't carry them herself. However, when the laundry should have been finished and Debbie still hadn't returned, her mother began to feel uneasy. It was getting dark outside, so she and her husband decided to walk to the laundromat to look for Debbie, but she was nowhere to be found. The employee informed them that Debbie had left the laundromat some time ago and had not returned. The news worried her mother, who began searching the surrounding streets with Roy. As they walked, they discovered a suspicious scene. A short distance from the laundromat, in the parking lot next to a car, there was a spilled detergent. Since Debbie had brought a box of detergent with her, her mother suspected that it might be hers. Despite expanding their search to the entire parking lot and the surrounding area, they found no other sign of Debbie. Neighbors who knew the family joined in the search. Debbie's mother decided to call the police for help. The police investigated the parking lot and discovered their first clue: spilled laundry detergent just inches from a parked car, and on the car door, they found several clear fingerprints. The police found fresh fingerprints on the car that were located lower than the handle, which seemed unusual. They suspected that an unknown person might have grabbed the girl while touching the car at this spot. The officers collected the fingerprints and sent them to forensic experts for analysis. They also started searching for the car's owner to confirm whether the fingerprints belonged to them. With no other leads, the police began a thorough search of the area, looking for new clues or witnesses. The laundry worker reported that she did not see anything suspicious. Debbie had waited for the laundry to finish, then left the building with the detergent box. It is possible that she went home to ask someone to pick up her clothes. Police discovered the first key witness, 12-year-old Sandra, who said that as she and her friend walked to a laundromat to drop off dirty clothes, they saw a man grab a girl on the street, drag her to his car parked near the laundromat, and drive away quickly while she screamed for help. Sandra and her friend were lucky to avoid the man's car. Debbie screamed in a car, but he did not slow down. At the time, Sandra did not consider what she saw to be a kidnapping. She assumed the man was a family member who had come to pick Debbie up, possibly against her will. So Sandra did not report the incident to the authorities or tell any adults about it. After learning about Debbie's disappearance, Sandra provided essential details to investigators. She described the abductor's vehicle as a dark-colored, likely 1957 model pickup truck. She also described the man as young, white, with thick dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Another key witness, a girl who lived in the same building as Debbie, shared her observations. She saw a dark-colored pickup truck drive past the apartment building on the evening in question. The girl initially thought the driver of the car was her uncle, but when he stopped in front of her and looked at her, she realized it was someone else. She described the driver as a white man with medium-length dark hair and provided additional details about his appearance. She also reported that he parked his car near their building, next to the same car where a detergent spill would later be discovered. Another witness, a man who lived near the girl's home, reported that a dark-colored pickup truck, possibly a Dodge, almost hit him while he was driving to visit his wife in the hospital. The driver appeared to be in his 30s with dark hair, and the witness saw a girl in the car trying to escape while the driver held her with one arm. Based on these accounts, the police believed Debbie had been kidnapped. They circulated the suspect's vehicle to all patrol units and created a composite sketch of the driver based on descriptions from witnesses. Some officers searched for similar vehicles and checked their owners, while others conducted a wide-ranging search for the girl. As the days passed, more volunteers and police from surrounding towns joined the search. Police questioned Debbie's family, and after investigation, they were all cleared as potential suspects. Debbie's biological father, who lived in the same city, was notified of her disappearance at work and immediately joined the search effort. Police also ran background checks on convicted criminals who lived near Debbie's home, but none of them appeared to be viable suspects. The search for Debbie continued for over 2 weeks without any significant leads. It wasn't until January 29th, when a group of students joined the search teams, that a breakthrough occurred. The students were sent to search a wooded area several miles from Debbie's house. After nearly 5 hours of searching, one of the students noticed a set of tracks on the ground that led from the trail into the forest, suggesting that something had been dragged into the woods. As they followed the trail about 150 feet into the woods, they discovered a human body and immediately contacted the police. Upon further inspection, they quickly identified the body as Debbie Randall. She was wearing the same outfit her mother had described on the day she went missing. However, her shoes were missing. The medical examination of Debbie's body revealed that she had been strangled to death and had also been sexually assaulted. A single dark hair was found on her body, which was likely to belong to the killer. Although DNA analysis was not available at the time, experts were able to examine the hair under a microscope and estimate that it came from a man between the ages of 18 and 30. The investigation then focused on the victim's clothing, which was covered in soil. Police enlisted the help of a geologist to analyze the soil, along with a forensic team. They discovered that some of the soil contained a type of soil mined less than 10 miles from their town called North Georgia clay. However, other stains on the clothing were found to be from a different type of clay, mined by a company just 2 miles from where the body was found. Police theorized that the perpetrator did not kill Debbie immediately, but rather drove her to remote areas, sexually assaulting her in one location and killing her in another, before finally dumping her body in the woods. Police believe the killer may have been hired by one of the nearby mining companies. After contacting these companies, the police searched the employees of both companies but did not find the suspect or the vehicle described by the victims. Furthermore, they found fingerprints near the abduction site, but unfortunately, when these fingerprints were compared to the suspects, there was no match. Debbie's death sent shockwaves through the city, with thousands attending her funeral. Police repeatedly ran into roadblocks in their search for clues. Police officer Morris Nix investigated many suspects and eventually narrowed the list down to 4 people. For Morris Nix, Debbie's murder remained a top priority throughout his career. The case took a breakthrough with the creation of the FBI's DNA database. Experts successfully extracted a genetic profile from hair found on Debbie's body, which was then entered into the database. However, no matches were found. In 2015, 43 years after the murder, police reopened the case and decided to re-examine the victim's clothing using modern technology. The clothing had been stored in an evidence vault since the crime. When re-examined, some of the evidence had degraded over time, resulting in only a partial DNA profile. In 2018, Debbie's mother gave an interview, expressing her hope that her daughter's killer would be found. After the tragedy, she found it unbearable to stay in their apartment, so she moved to another city. Her only wish was for the case to be solved before she died. Sadly, she died of cancer at the age of 78, just weeks after the interview, and was buried next to Debbie. In 2019, the local police department received additional funding, which allowed them to conduct a more thorough analysis of Debbie's clothing. This time, experts successfully extracted a full DNA sample, but unfortunately, the perpetrator's DNA was still not found in the FBI database. Debbie's father was interviewed and shared that he thought about his daughter every day for decades. Sadly, he passed away in 2022, shortly after the interview. Police turned their attention to the first piece of evidence they had, DNA. They partnered with a Florida company that specializes in an advanced DNA analysis technique called genomics. Police provided the company with all the biological samples they had collected over the years and waited for the results. Experts created a DNA profile of the suspect and began searching for his relatives in public genetic databases. After analyzing thousands of potential relatives of the killer, investigators narrowed their search to a family in Marietta. In 2023, police asked the family to provide a DNA sample, which they agreed to. Analysis showed that the killer was indeed a close relative of the family. Experts re-examined the family tree and quickly identified a man named William Rose. However, William Rose committed suicide in 1974, just 2 years after Debbie's murder. Police obtained a warrant to exhume William Rose's remains and took a sample of William Rose's DNA for analysis. 51 years after Debbie's murder, police finally identified William Rose as the killer. At the time of the murder, William Rose, 24, lived in the same building as Debbie's family, and he visited them frequently. The case has finally been solved. Debbie's brother, Melvin, is the only living relative. Melvin attended a press conference and expressed gratitude to everyone involved in solving the case that lasted more than 50 years. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Mitzi Sanchez. Mitzi Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992, in Vallejo, California. She grew up in a large, with 2 brothers and a sister. As a child, Mitzi was cheerful and bright, enjoying time outdoors with friends and playing with her siblings. From a young age, she demonstrated independence, often walking to elementary school with her brother without adult supervision, as the school was nearby. On August 10, 2000, Mitzi's 8th birthday, she was excited about the celebration party her family had planned. However, when she asked her mom if she could skip school, the request was denied. Upset, Mitzi left her home with her brother at around 7:30 a.m. The plan was for her to wait for her brother after classes, and they would walk home together. But when her brother went outside the school, he couldn't find Mitzi. Assuming she had already left without him, he headed home alone. However, when he arrived home, Mitzi had disappeared without a trace. Mitzi's older sister grew concerned when she realized Mitzi was missing, especially since her birthday party was supposed to take place that day. As her absence seemed unusual, the sister called their mother around 4 p.m. to report the situation. The mother immediately contacted Mitzi's school and confirmed that Mitzi had attended all her classes that day. However, when the mother reached out to family members and Mitzi's friends, no one had seen her after school. Mitzi's family became worried and started looking for her. Family, friends, and neighbors mounted a massive search operation. Some walked the streets, while others went door to door along the route from her home to school, asking locals if they had seen her. They also distributed flyers with information about Mitzi. Despite their extensive efforts, they were unable to find her, leading Mitzi's parents to call 911 for assistance. The police quickly joined the search and local media started covering the case. The news of Mitzi's disappearance spread quickly, not just in local news outlets but also across the state. Mitzi's family has given several interviews to raise awareness of her disappearance. Her mother desperately pleaded with them to return her daughter safely. The police received a lot of information, but none of it was useful. 24 hours after Mitzi went missing, the investigation had new clues. A man contacted the police to report finding bloody rags at a landfill. After further examination, experts discovered that the rags were actually bed sheets from a hotel in Vallejo. The evidence was sent to the lab for analysis, but it would take several days to obtain the results. Investigators also went to the hotel, but they were unable to confirm whether Mitzi was there. As the investigators waited for the lab results, they thoroughly searched the landfill for any additional clues, but they found nothing. However, the next day, August 12th, the police received a call that changed the course of the investigation. At around 11 a.m., a man called the police to report a disturbing incident. While driving through an industrial area in Santa Clara, he saw a little girl running towards his van, screaming that someone was chasing her. The girl quickly got into the van, and the driver saw a man running in their direction. A young girl escaped from her kidnapper and sought help from a van driver. As soon as she got into the truck, the kidnapper quickly fled the scene. The girl, who identified herself as Mitzi Sanchez, told the driver what had happened, and he immediately contacted the police. The officers quickly took Mitzi to a hospital for a medical examination. They also arranged for her to speak with her mother over the phone, and soon her relatives arrived at the hospital, where they were reunited with Mitzi. The van driver proved to be a valuable witness in the investigation. He was able to provide the police with the license plate number of the kidnapper's vehicle, which he had seen as it sped away. The truck driver happened to be on the road that day, which was lucky. If he hadn't been there, the kidnapper might have caught up with Mitzi. The police checked the license plate and discovered that the car belonged to 39-year-old Curtis Dean Anderson, a man with a history of crime. He had previous convictions for theft and kidnapping, and was also suspected of other offenses. Police took a statement from Mitzi about what happened to her. Mitzi recounted that on August 10th, she was excited to finish school and head home to celebrate her birthday with her family. When her last class ended, she decided not to wait for her brother and walked home alone. As she walked, she noticed a car parked by the side of the road about a few hundred yards away. Inside, a man was watching her through the rearview mirror. The girl felt uncomfortable, but she was not worried because it was daytime and she was walking on a familiar street. In addition, because she was young, she was not aware of the potential risks posed by strangers. Mitzi was approached by a man who got out of his car and asked for her help. He claimed to have a leg injury from an accident and needed assistance in retrieving a roll of tape from under the car seat. Despite feeling uneasy, Mitzi agreed to help, as her parents had taught her to assist others in need. However, as soon as Mitzi reached for the tape, the man's intentions became clear. He pushed her into the car, covered her mouth, and slammed the door shut. Mitzi tried to scream, but it was too late. The man drove away, Mitzi to watch in horror as they passed by her home, where her family was preparing to celebrate her birthday. The man eventually stopped in a deserted parking lot, where he gave Mitzi new clothes and forced her to change. He then threw away her old clothes in a nearby trash bin. He warned Mitzi not to try to escape, claiming he had a gun and that no one had ever managed to escape from him. For the next few hours, Mitzi was driven to an unknown location. Mitzi demanded to know why she had been kidnapped. But the man's response was that he had gone through a similar experience as a child. When night fell, he stopped the car again and began covering the windows with rags to conceal their location. He then shackled Mitzi's leg with a chain and padlock. The man pulled out a bottle of alcohol and insisted that Mitzi drink some. Despite her initial reluctance, she eventually gave in. He took pictures of her using a camera. The perpetrator then lay down in the car to sleep. Fearing that she would be at his mercy if she fell asleep, Mitzi stayed awake and began thinking of an escape plan. Her chance came when she saw a police car driving past the parking lot. However, it was too far away, and she realized that even if she screamed, the officers would not be able to hear her. The next day, the perpetrator continued to drive Mitzi around the city, forcing her to sit on the floor of the car and covering her with sheets to conceal her from view. At one point, he briefly stepped out of the vehicle, giving Mitzi an opportunity to try and escape. She attempted to free her leg from the chain but quickly realized it was impossible. She also found a nail file and tried to use it to unlock the padlock, but unfortunately, it didn't work. When the perpetrator returned to the car and drove away, he made a disturbing claim: he had stopped by Mitzi's parents' house. Under the guise of a good citizen, he asked for flyers to distribute around town, further manipulating the situation. Mitzi was left feeling shocked and overwhelmed, knowing she had been so close to home yet still remained in captivity. Over the next few hours, the perpetrator repeatedly stopped the car, getting in and out. Eventually, he drove to a remote area outside of town and parked. There, he committed a sexual assault against Mitzi, leaving her in a state of shock. Afterward, the perpetrator fell asleep. The next morning, he resumed driving, making several stops to buy cigarettes and alcohol. When he returned to the car and leaned into the cabin, an object fell out of his pocket. He warned Mitzi not to look, but she disobeyed. She glanced down and saw a large set of keys. Mitzi quickly realized that one of the keys could open the lock on her chain. Although afraid of the perpetrator's possible reaction, Mitzi was brave enough to act. She grabbed the keys, selected one that seemed to fit the lock best, and tried to unlock it. To her relief, the key worked. Mitzi managed to free herself from the chain and moved towards the car door, which was the last barrier between her and freedom. To escape, she opened the window and tried to climb out. However, her body was exhausted, and her legs had almost no strength left. Using the last of my strength, she pushed herself upwards and finally jumped out of the car. As she moved around it, she spotted her kidnapper, who instantly saw her as well. He yelled for her to come back, but Mitzi had no intention of surrendering. She took off in the opposite direction, and her kidnapper started chasing after her. As she fled, she attempted to get help from passing cars by waving her hands and screaming, but all the cars ignored her pleas and kept driving by. Not losing hope, Mitzi kept running forward. In her desperate situation, every moment seemed like an eternity. Mitzi is driven by the fear that if she stops even for a moment, she will be captured by the perpetrator, a fate she is determined to avoid. Finally, she spotted a van and she ran towards it, jumping in front of it to stop the driver. The driver quickly halted, and Mitzi climbed into the cabin, exhausted, dehydrated, and starving, but safe. At the hospital, she received the medical attention she needed, and her family soon arrived to be reunited with her. Mitzi's story quickly became top news in town. When she returned home, thousands of people gathered on her street, cheering and shouting birthday wishes she had missed while in captivity. Meanwhile, the police were searching for her kidnapper, whose location remained unknown. During the investigation, the police showed Mitzi's mother a photo of the suspect, and she recognized him. She had seen him twice before, once before Mitzi's abduction, when he was standing on their street, staring at their house, and again the day after Mitzi's disappearance, when he came to their home asking for flyers. Police eventually arrested the suspect, Curtis. He confessed to Mitzi that she was not his first victim and that no one had ever managed to escape him before. Curtis's careful planning and execution suggested he had experience with similar crimes. It is notable that Curtis had a prior conviction for kidnapping a woman in 1991, for which he served time until his release in November 1999. The trial began in April of the same year. Mitzi bravely testified in a crowded courtroom, recounting every detail of Curtis's crimes against her. Even though Curtis was there, Mitzi remained calm and completed his mission. As a result, Curtis received a 251-year prison sentence. However, this marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. Detectives regularly visited Curtis in jail, questioning him about potential involvement in other crimes. One of these visits, they discovered that Curtis had confessed to a fellow inmate about kidnapping and murdering 8 additional girls. The inmate agreed to cooperate with the police, sharing Curtis's confession in detail. However, Curtis himself was reluctant to reveal all his secrets. Instead of denying the allegations, he attempted to negotiate privileges in exchange for information, speaking with detectives in riddles. As for Mitzi, she was constantly bullied and ridiculed by her classmates, labeling her the kidnapped girl. They even told her she should have died instead of being rescued. The constant bullying made her school years extremely difficult, which hindered her recovery from the traumatic experience. Mitzi could no longer handle the immense pressure. As a result, she turned to alcohol as a means of coping with stress, relying more and more on it. Eventually, she lost hope of returning to a normal life. However, a car accident after a party with friends changes her life forever. Mitzi suffered serious injuries, including a broken neck and arm, and spent 2 weeks in a coma. Upon waking up, she received news from her doctors. She was pregnant with a daughter. This gave Mitzi the power to change her life for the better. She decided to devote herself entirely to her daughter and also to helping other children who were victims of various crimes. Mitzi went on to found a non-profit organization that continues to help those in need to this day. As for Curtis, he passed away in 2007 due to illness, just 6 years after being sentenced. The detectives' only regret was that they were unable to obtain full confessions from him regarding other cases he was suspected of being involved in. Notably, his son followed a similar path and was also convicted of murder. Unfortunately, the son's life was cut short in prison in 2019. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Lisa Valdez. Lisa Valdez was born on September 6, 1961, in San Francisco, California. She grew up with her mother and brother. Lisa and her mother had an exceptionally close relationship, rarely arguing. As a teenager, Lisa developed a passion for dance and an interest in modern technology. She was an early adopter of emerging technologies, including email, which was still a novelty at the time. This interest in technology would later shape her career path. After graduating from college, Lisa found a job as a software analyst in San Francisco. Her mother then used her savings to buy Lisa an apartment in a desirable neighborhood. Lisa lived alone in the apartment, progressing her career and spending time with her family whenever possible. She also continued to pursue her passion for dance. On May 16, 1998, Lisa, then 36, hosted her mother and some family friends at her apartment for the evening. After the guests departed, her mother helped with the dishes before heading home. Before leaving, Lisa promised to call her mother the next day, but the call never came. Initially, her mother assumed Lisa was simply busy. Since Lisa had dance practice scheduled for the next day, her mother decided to wait. However, the entire day passed without any word from Lisa. After trying unsuccessfully to contact Lisa for several days, Lisa's mother began to worry. When Lisa did not show up for work on Monday, her co-workers called her mother to express their concern. The mother immediately decided to go to Lisa's apartment complex. When Lisa's mother arrived at her home, she saw a group of police officers. Lisa's mother approached the police to ask what was going on and was told that residents had reported a strange smell coming from one of the apartments. The apartment manager investigated, found the door unlocked, and called the police after discovering a body on the floor. Police quickly identified the victim as Lisa. Her body showed signs of trauma, making it clear she had been murdered. The advanced state of decomposition suggested that Lisa had been dead for several days. The police suspected that Lisa had been assaulted due to the presence of her underwear next to her body. The crime scene was marked by extensive blood stains on the floor and bed, with the TV and air conditioner still on. However, the disarray of the apartment was later found to be consistent with Lisa's usual living habits. There was no indication of a robbery, as all of Lisa's valuables, including jewelry, were left untouched. The only missing items were her keys and a gym bag. A peculiar detail was the discovery that the attacker had cut off some of Lisa's hair and taken it with them. Detectives believed that the killer may have known Lisa personally. This theory was supported by the lack of forced entry into the apartment complex, which was secured by a fence and required a key or resident approval for access. Police investigating Lisa's murder began by interviewing her neighbors. Their first lead came when a neighbor mentioned discovering a bent metal door frame and faint blood stains on her door 2 days before Lisa's body was discovered. The neighbor had previously reported the incident to the building's management, but they had not notified the police. Police are certain that Lisa's murder was linked to a break-in at her neighbor's apartment. It is possible that the person trying to break into her neighbor's apartment was seen by Lisa and killed her, but another theory is that the break-in may have occurred after Lisa was murdered. Police also interviewed the person who cleaned Lisa's apartment weekly. She said that 2 days before Lisa's body was found, she tried to open the apartment door with her key but found it locked from the inside. When she looked through the door, she saw a naked woman lying on the floor and a male voice talking. Assuming it was a private situation, the cleaner quickly left without doing anything. Police suspected Lisa was dead when the cleaner heard a man's voice. And it was her killer, who was still in the apartment. The cleaner also reported seeing a black Ziploc bag near the body. An envelope containing cash was found taped to the inside of Lisa's apartment door. The money was for the cleaner, as Lisa always left it with her the day before cleaning. The presence of the envelope suggests that Lisa was likely attacked after her mother left, sometime between midnight and early morning. Neighbors who lived downstairs reported hearing a loud noise coming from upstairs on the night of the attack, followed by someone coming down the stairs. Although they did not see who it was, the neighbors' accounts provided a timeline of events. Police continued to search Lisa's apartment for clues while medical professionals examined her body. Forensic analysis revealed that a fingerprint on the toilet seat did not belong to Lisa. In an attempt to identify the fingerprint, the police collected fingerprints from all of Lisa's friends and family members, but none of them matched the mystery fingerprint. Detectives therefore suspected that the mystery fingerprint might belong to Lisa's killer. Medical examiners released their report, shedding new light on the case. Lisa's body showed more than 20 stab wounds, but the advanced decomposition made it difficult to determine if she had been sexually assaulted. The medical team also discovered skin particles under Lisa's nails, which were likely to have come from her attacker, and sent them to the lab for analysis. One of the pillowcases showed multiple blood stains, which upon analysis were found to be a mixture of Lisa's blood and another person's. The police sent the blood stains to the laboratory for further testing. Police believe the killer may have accidentally injured himself when stabbing Lisa. At the scene, they discovered 2 bandages from a first aid kit in the toilet, which the killer may have used to bandage his wound. Additionally, the killer may have left fingerprints on the toilet seat when discarding the bandages. DNA analysis revealed that the blood on the pillowcase belonged to a man whose DNA was not in the FBI database. Furthermore, the skin particles found under Lisa's fingernails and the blood on her knee were from the same person. Although the DNA did not match anyone in the database, detectives now had a DNA profile of the killer. The police compared the DNA evidence with samples from criminals in the area. They also began to scrutinize Lisa's acquaintances. Lisa's mother mentioned that Lisa had met a man named Albert Ketto, and that they had planned to go on a date the day after the murder. However, Albert Ketto had canceled their plans just days before. Police brought Albert Ketto in for questioning and noticed a large cut on his hand. Police considered Albert Ketto a potential suspect. However, Albert Ketto denied any involvement in the crime. Police collected Albert Ketto's fingerprints and DNA samples for further analysis. However, the test results showed that none of Albert Ketto's samples matched the blood found on the pillowcase. Additionally, the skin particles under Lisa's fingernails belonged to someone else. This new information led investigators to expand their search for other suspects. Police decided to look at messages left on Lisa's answering machine in the days before she was killed. Police compiled a list of 40 callers but discovered one unusual message. It came from a man who had called Lisa just hours before the murder. He left a message saying, "You know how it goes. Hey Lisa, are you home?" When police played the message to Lisa's friend, the friend recognized the voice as Albert Robinson, a co-worker of Lisa's. Lisa and Albert Robinson worked together. However, Albert Robinson had expressed romantic feelings for Lisa, but she did not return his feelings. Albert Robinson appeared at Lisa's memorial service a few days after the murder. Albert Robinson claimed that he and Lisa were in love, saying that they planned to get married and start a family. However, Lisa's friends and mother objected to this. Lisa told them that she had no feelings for Albert Robinson and that the relationship between the two was just friends. During questioning, Albert Robinson denied any involvement in Lisa's murder, claiming that he loved Lisa and would never hurt her. However, he refused to provide DNA and fingerprint samples to the police, which aroused suspicion and made him the prime suspect. Police obtained a search warrant for Albert Robinson's home, where they discovered something unusual. Albert Robinson's home contained many photos of Lisa. However, despite the evidence, he continued to deny his involvement. He cooperated by providing his fingerprints and DNA samples to the police. However, they were surprised when Albert Robinson's test results did not match the samples collected at Lisa's apartment. Police eliminated Albert Robinson as a suspect. Due to lack of evidence, the case remained unsolved for many years. The investigation continues, with police waiting for the suspect's DNA or fingerprints to be matched in a database. Over the years, Lisa's mother has used social media platforms to plead for information. But the police have yet to uncover any new clues, leaving the case even more unsolved. In 2010, the FBI used new DNA technology to identify suspects by matching their DNA to relatives in a database. This method was limited to close relatives. On September 2nd, police received the call from the FBI with the news. Although the FBI did not compare the DNA to possible relatives in the database, they did retest the original DNA sample as part of the process. Amazingly, 13 years after the murder, the retested DNA sample was a perfect match. DNA from blood and skin particles found under Lisa's fingernails matched a 52-year-old man named Anthony Hughes, whose DNA had recently been added to the FBI database. Although Anthony had a lengthy criminal record, his DNA was not in the database because he had committed a minor crime. However, a change in California law requires DNA samples from all convicted felons, regardless of the severity of their crimes. As a result, Anthony's DNA was collected after he was arrested for petty theft. The investigation revealed that Anthony's fingerprints were also on file and matched those found on the toilet seat in Lisa's apartment. Experts were able to identify the specific finger that left the fingerprint. Prior to the arrest, police searched for additional evidence that linked Anthony to the crime. 13 years ago, police reviewed calls to Lisa's phone before she was killed, but they ignored calls made after her death. Recently, police discovered a call made by Anthony to Lisa's phone just one day after her death. He left a message, the content of which seemed normal and did not arouse any suspicion at the time. If the police had investigated Anthony at that time, they would have found his extensive criminal record. When they went through Lisa's belongings, detectives found Anthony's phone number in her address book, indicating that she knew him. After talking to Lisa's friends, the police learned that Lisa had dated Anthony in high school. The police now had all the information they needed to question Anthony. Since Anthony was homeless at the time and had no fixed address, the police approached cautiously to avoid Anthony fleeing. They arrested him under the pretext of investigating a series of robberies in San Francisco, and he surrendered without resistance. Police began asking about a series of robberies, gradually bringing up Anthony's previous convictions. Eventually, police asked him if he knew a woman named Lisa Valdez. He initially denied knowing her, but when shown a photo, he admitted that they had been high school acquaintances. Anthony also claimed that he had not seen Lisa since the late 1980s. The police pressed Anthony for information about his relationship with Lisa. Eventually, the police produced evidence of his DNA found in Lisa's apartment in 1998. Upon hearing this, Anthony burst into tears. Anthony was restrained as he cried and screamed. He was eventually charged with murder, and detectives informed Lisa's family that her killer had been arrested. However, the trial did not begin until 4 years later. During the trial, Anthony initially appeared confident, but as the trial progressed, his pace changed. He began appearing in court with a Bible and wearing a cross. Anthony's lawyer argued that his client was incapable of committing the murder due to a medical condition that weakened his muscles, making movement extremely difficult. Despite the defense's argument, the prosecution presented strong evidence linking Anthony to the crime scene. This included his skin cells found under the Lisa's fingernails, his blood on a pillowcase, and his fingerprint on the toilet seat. Anthony maintained his innocence, claiming he had not seen the Lisa since the late 1980s. The prosecution, on the other hand, proposed a different scenario. They believed Anthony had contacted the Lisa, visited her home, and attempted to engage in intimate relations with her. When she refused, he became enraged and killed her. As part of the crime, he cut off a portion of her hair and took it with him before fleeing the scene. Ultimately, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict, finding Anthony guilty of first-degree murder. However, the prosecution faced challenges in securing a conviction for sexual assault due to the advanced state of the Lisa's decomposition, which made it difficult to gather sufficient evidence. The charges were reduced from first-degree murder to second-degree murder, which carries a lighter sentence. Anthony was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Anthony has been in prison since then and continues to maintain his innocence. Anthony will be eligible for parole in 2031 at age 72. However, Anthony's chances of being paroled are slim, as parole boards typically view refusal to plead guilty as a lack of remorse. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm, which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, The FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory. He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Whitton, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie, and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions, and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up, as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time, Christopher revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detectives' behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again. Hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county, pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case were sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final, and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution, but it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Gretchen Harrington. Gretchen Harrington was born on June 13, 1967, in Pennsylvania. She was the youngest of 3 sisters, and her family moved to the small town of Brawl shortly after her birth. Gretchen's father, a pastor, took a job at the local church, and Gretchen quickly grew to love the town. She spent much of her free time outdoors with her sisters and friends. Brawl was a safe community where parents felt comfortable letting their children play outside until dark. As a member of a devoutly religious family, Gretchen spent much time at her father's church and excelled in Sunday school, always getting top grades. On August 15, 1975, Gretchen's family was eagerly awaiting the return of her mother and newborn sister from the hospital. Gretchen wanted to be home to greet them, but her father encouraged her to attend Sunday school to keep up her grades. Gretchen reluctantly agreed to go to church and set off with her Bible. Her older sisters, who usually walked with her, stayed home that morning. However, Gretchen wasn't worried about the short 8-minute walk to church. Sunday school is divided into 2 sessions. The first session takes place at Trinity Church and lasts an hour and a half. After that, some of the children go to Father Gretchen's church. But when the children arrived at the second church at 11:30 a.m., Gretchen's father noticed that his daughter was not there. He assumed she might be at the first church, so he called to check. The pastor's wife answered, informing him that Gretchen was not there. She then told her husband, David, who was a Sunday school teacher. He was surprised by the news, since Gretchen had not attended his class that morning. Gretchen's father became worried when he couldn't find her. He asked David to contact the police and started searching the area between the churches and nearby streets, but she was nowhere to be found. He also reached out to the parents of her friends, but they were either at church or home. Her best friend, who was also David's daughter, hadn't seen her all day. As news of Gretchen's disappearance spread, the police quickly launched a search operation. Hundreds of volunteers joined in, many of whom knew Gretchen's father from his church. Together, they searched the entire town, then moved on to wooded areas and the riverbank. A police helicopter was also deployed to scan the area from above. The search continued through the night, but to no avail. The next day, more volunteers joined in. Police posted flyers with Gretchen's photo and information about her disappearance along the roads. Despite their efforts, police were unable to find Gretchen. After several days of searching, no significant clues were found and Gretchen's fate remains a mystery. The town is known for its safe environment, where children are often allowed to play outside freely without adult supervision from a young age. However, this sense of security is no longer there when Gretchen goes missing. Some people thought she might have run away from home, while others believed she had gone swimming in the river and drowned. However, the most alarming theory was that she had been abducted by someone. As a result, parents became extremely cautious and stopped letting their children go out alone. Police interviewed bystanders. They gathered some clues. One witness reported seeing a girl who looked like Gretchen near the church on the morning she went missing. According to the witness, a green sedan approached the girl, but the witness did not see what happened next. Another person shared a similar story, but this time described a white Cadillac approaching the girl. Police checked the owners of cars matching the description in the area. 4 days later, detectives received a new lead. A resident of Westchester, a town 30 minutes from Brawl, contacted police and reported finding children's shorts matching the description of Gretchen's clothing. Police immediately showed Gretchen's mother the shorts, but she confirmed that they did not belong to her daughter. The investigation into Gretchen's disappearance had stalled, with no progress made for several weeks. As a result, the police halted their search operation and shifted their focus to gathering more information. They continued to interview witnesses, but with each passing day, their hopes of finding Gretchen alive began to dwindle. Until October 14th, when police received a phone call. A jogger was running in a large national park, about 20 minutes from Brawl, when he stumbled upon a body. The jogger immediately alerted park rangers, who then notified the police. Upon arriving at the scene, police quickly determined that the body was that of a child. However, due to the severe state of decomposition, identification of the child was extremely difficult. Police suspected that Gretchen might be the victim, so they showed her parents the clothes found on her body. Gretchen's mother quickly identified them as her daughters because she had sewn them herself. Forensic experts later confirmed that the body was Gretchen's by comparing them to her dental records. They also determined that she had died from severe head trauma. Because the body was so badly decomposed, police were unable to gather further information, including whether Gretchen had been sexually assaulted. Additionally, DNA analysis was not available in 1975, leaving police without any further leads. News of the murder sparked renewed interest in the case, and police received numerous tips from the community. The investigation into Gretchen's death turned up no leads. Police screened nearby residents with a history of violent crime, but nothing came up. Months later, the case had made no progress. Over the years, the case was reopened periodically, and the police reviewed the available information. However, each time, the investigation yielded no new evidence. Even applying DNA analysis was of no help in this case, as no foreign DNA was found on Gretchen's body or clothing. The case of Gretchen's murder went unsolved for decades, occasionally resurfacing in newspapers and on television. However, it wasn't until recent years that the case regained widespread public attention. Two local journalists, Joanna and Mike, decided to write a book about the crime, dedicating several years to gathering information. As children, both Joanna and Mike grew up in the same town as Gretchen. Joanna, who was only 9 years old when the crime occurred, the town had changed forever, and children were no longer allowed to roam freely. Leave home unsupervised. This fear lasted for years, leaving a lasting impression on the townspeople, the memory of Gretchen's murder still fresh in their minds. To write their book, Joanna and Mike had access to the case files and interviewed individuals involved in the investigation. By carefully piecing together the events surrounding Gretchen's disappearance, they were able to reconstruct the entire story. The book, released in 2022, brought attention to Gretchen's case. Months later, a woman contacted police about Gretchen. The woman said she was 10 years old at the time of the murder and lived in Havertone, near Gretchen's home. She was friends with Gretchen and her sisters, as well as many other kids in the area. She often slept over at friends' houses, and one night, while she was at her sister's house, she woke up in the middle of the night feeling someone touching her. When she opened her eyes, she saw their father standing in front of her, who quickly left. The next day, she stayed another night. Her friend's dad continued to come into her bedroom and started touching her. The next morning, she finally told one of her sisters about what happened to her. She was surprised that it happened quite often with her friends. When the woman returned home, she shared her entire story with her parents. However, instead of going to the authorities, they banned her from ever going to her friend's house again. This was just a week before Gretchen went missing. The woman eventually revealed the identity of the man involved in her story, David Zandstra, the same pastor who taught at Sunday school. She also shared that a month after Gretchen went missing, one of her friends told her about the incident, that a man had tried to kidnap her. The girl refused to get into his car and later confided to her friends that the real culprit was David Zandstra. The woman provided her personal diary as evidence of the information provided. In her diary entry on September 15, 1975, she documented her friend's request to keep the encounter secret due to fears of potential harm from David Zandstra. Upon receiving this new information, the police immediately reopened the investigation into Gretchen's disappearance. While reviewing the case files, detectives discovered several suspicious factors that indirectly implicated David Zandstra. It was David Zandstra who reported Gretchen missing to the police, providing investigators with a detailed description of her clothing: dark blue zip-up shorts with front buttons and pockets without zippers or buttons, and a white shirt with braided hair. However, he mentioned that he had not seen Gretchen that day, raising questions about how he knew what she was wearing. His description was later confirmed by the discovery of her body, dressed exactly as he had described. Police closely examined David, the man who taught Sunday school at Gretchen's father's church. David initially claimed he had not seen Gretchen on the morning of her disappearance. However, David's alibi gave him enough time to kidnap Gretchen, kill her, dump her body in the park, and return to the church to teach. The investigation revealed that David and his family had moved to another state just months after Gretchen went missing. This sudden move, combined with David's ownership of a green scooter, attracted the attention of the police. The police decided to question David, who was now 83 years old and living in Georgia. On July 17, 2023, they began questioning David. As the conversation progressed, David realized that the police suspected him of murder. In response, he denied all accusations and asked what evidence they had against him. David was confronted with incriminating evidence, including a woman's testimony about his inappropriate behavior at a sleepover and allegations of molesting his own daughter. When he learned that his secret had been exposed, David's demeanor changed. After 48 years of silence, he finally began to talk about the murder. According to David, on the morning of the murder, he drove his green American motor station wagon to the church where Gretchen's father was the pastor. He saw Gretchen leave the house and waited until no one was around before approaching her. He offered her a ride, and she agreed. However, instead of taking Gretchen to the church, David drove her to a secluded park area. He stopped the car and instructed her to undress, but Gretchen refused and asked to go home. In response, David struck her several times on the head, causing her to lose consciousness. He then removed her clothes and committed the crime before driving her to another park. He carried her body into the bushes and concealed it with branches. David then returned to the church to begin his classes. When David confessed to the crime, the police arrested him for Gretchen's murder. David went to Pennsylvania, where he was held pending trial. David's work held a respectable position in society, which protected him from suspicion. However, after the truth finally came to light, the police obtained a DNA sample and began comparing it with DNA from other unsolved cases. They also investigated the disappearances of young girls in the cities where he worked. Police have linked David to the disappearance of 4-year-old Amanda Campbell from California, who went missing in 1991. The case resembles Gretchen's. At the time, David Zandstra was a pastor in that same neighborhood. The police currently have no concrete evidence against David, but they have found similarities between the various cases and Gretchen's kidnapping. Therefore, they are investigating David as the possible perpetrator of the cases. The trial for Gretchen's murder has not yet begun. David's attorney is trying to delay the process and advise him to withdraw his confession. If this happens, the trial could drag on for years, and given his advanced age, David may not live to see the verdict. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Kelly Dwyer. Kelly Dwyer was born in 1986 in Lincolnshire, a suburb of Chicago. Her parents divorced when she was 16, but they remained close to her. The divorce had a significant impact on Kelly's life. A year after her parents' divorce, Kelly graduated from high school without a clear plan for her future. To delay her decision to go to college, she worked part-time at a local restaurant. 6 years later, in 2008, Kelly, then 22, moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to start afresh. She enrolled in college, became a yoga instructor, and found a job as a saleswoman to cover her living expenses. She also worked as a nanny to earn extra income. Kelly often visited trendy places around town, creating memorable experiences. When she met her father a month ago, she was living in Milwaukee, and her life was going well. At that time, Kelly was a successful yoga instructor and a popular employee at a sports store. Kelly seemed content with her life, enjoying her job and a year-long relationship with Chris Zacco, a 38-year-old IT manager for a transportation company. Chris had graduated from Boston University in 2009 with a degree in international business and had moved from New York City to Milwaukee for work. He was a hardworking, decent man from a good family who shared Kelly's interests in sports and entertainment. Kelly and Chris seemed to get along well. Chris had built a successful career, owned a luxury apartment, an expensive car, and a large fortune that he had earned himself. Kelly's father approved of him, seeing him as a great match for his daughter. On October 12, 2013, Kelly was nowhere to be seen at work. She was well liked for her punctuality and work ethic, so this struck everyone as odd. Her colleagues tried to contact her, but her cell phone was silent. She was also inactive on social media. Kelly had never left her phone behind before. She simply disappeared, and her loved ones contacted the police to file a missing persons report. However, during the investigation into Kelly's disappearance, detectives found no evidence of enemies or individuals who might want to harm her. All of her belongings were still at home, so police ruled out the possibility that she left voluntarily. What was concerning was that her bank account, phone, and other accounts had no activity. Police suspected that Kelly was in trouble. Since Chris was the last person to see her on October 10, 2013, investigators brought him in for questioning. Chris stated that he and Kelly spent time at his apartment in Lafayette Towers, then went to a nearby bar, socialized, and drank. They returned to his apartment around 2:30 a.m., had a good time, and went to bed. At 9 a.m., Kelly left Chris's apartment, and they never saw each other again. Chris insisted that Kelly was not his girlfriend, saying they had an open relationship. He also revealed that he was in love with someone else and had plans for a future with her. This raised suspicions among investigators. who found Chris's story plausible but noted inconsistencies in his words and actions. To investigate further, detectives interviewed friends who had been with Kelly and Chris the night before Kelly went missing. These friends confirmed that the group had a good time at a bar and then ordered pizza, eating it on a bench outside. Kelly seemed to be in a good mood, sharing her plans for the next day, which included sleeping in, doing yoga, doing laundry, and relaxing. Chris and Kelly left for his apartment that night, where they met another friend who had been invited over for drinks. This friend reported feeling uncomfortable in Chris's apartment because she sensed tension between Chris and Kelly. She recalled that Chris was smoking and chatting with her while Kelly seemed upset. Assuming that Kelly was just tired, the friend thought little of it and left the apartment. However, after talking to Kelly's other friends, investigators discovered that Chris and Kelly were not on good terms. Kelly loves Chris very much. But unfortunately, Chris seems uninterested in their relationship. Chris does not make any long-term plans involving Kelly, which worries her. Kelly's friend, missing, suspects that Chris is being unfaithful and that their relationship will not last. As a result, Kelly loses hope for a future with Chris and begins to look for other options. She creates a profile on a dating website and starts chatting with various men, but she has yet to meet any of them in real life. Kelly's intention is to have a backup plan in case things do not work out with Chris. Additionally, her friends notice bruises on Kelly's arms and neck and ask her about them, but Kelly dismisses their concerns by downplaying the situation. Her friends suspect that the bruises may be a sign of domestic violence, but Kelly never confirms their suspicions. Meanwhile, investigators analyzed security footage from Chris's home. The footage showed Kelly and Chris coming home drunk one night, but Kelly was never seen leaving the apartment. This contradicted Chris's testimony that Kelly left his home at 9 a.m. the next morning. It was later discovered that another friend of Chris's was at the apartment that night and admitted to using illegal drugs with Chris. Detectives obtained a search warrant for Chris's apartment and found numerous drugs, pills, pipes, and other paraphernalia, leading to Chris's arrest for possession. They also discovered a torn shower curtain that appeared to have been forcefully removed. During questioning, Chris remained calm and admitted to using drugs but denied distributing them. A search of his cell phone revealed disturbing content, including photos of an unconscious girl in bed and a video of Chris raping the girl, who appeared to have been strangled. This led to suspicions that Chris had drugged and exploited her. Evidence from Chris's phone was linked to Kelly's disappearance. Police returned to Chris's apartment with a dog, which responded to the bed and bathroom area before leading them to the front door. The dog then guided police to Chris's car in the parking lot and to a nearby dumpster. The investigation reached a critical stage when investigators believed Kelly had been murdered. Kelly's boyfriend, Chris, became the prime suspect, as evidence suggested he was the last person to see her alive. It is believed that he spent time with Kelly in his apartment before secretly moving her body into his car, a plan that would have escaped the building's 28 surveillance cameras. During the investigation, police analyzed Chris's computer and discovered child pornography. This led to Chris being charged with possession of the images, but he was released on bail and is awaiting trial. The investigation continues as authorities attempt to find Kelly's body and gather enough evidence to build a stronger case against Chris. It should be noted that Chris had claimed to be in a long-term relationship with a woman, and investigators quickly began gathering information about that woman. The investigation uncovered the identity of a woman named Megan, with whom Chris had been secretly in a 3-year relationship, unbeknownst to Kelly, similar to the relationship he had with Kelly. Police came to interview Megan and showed her photos of Chris' apartment. After a thorough inspection, Megan found several items missing, including a shower curtain in the bathroom, a rug, several towels, and the large golf bag that was usually kept in the bedroom. Detectives believe Kelly could fit in the large bag Megan reported missing. After examining the building's entrances and exits, Police found a side path that Chris could have taken to get to his car without being seen by surveillance cameras. Reviewing footage from the parking lot cameras, Chris was seen arriving at the house with the large bag, which he placed in the trunk of his car. At 10:06 a.m. on October 11th, Chris left the house in his car. Just 2 minutes later, at 10:08 a.m., Kelly's phone lost connection at the same location. Over the next 8 hours, footage captured Chris making multiple trips between his home and his car, loading up on belongings. Before leaving for good at 6:16 p.m., Chris did not return home until the next day. When investigators asked him what he had been doing the previous day, he said he was moving his summer sports gear to his mother's house. However, no one found this explanation credible. Chris was supposed to meet Megan at 7:30 that evening, but he arrived more than an hour late. Detectives suspected that he was looking for a place to dispose of Kelly's body, which would explain his delay. Unfortunately, they were unable to track his movements because his phone had been turned off since the morning. As an IT expert, Chris would have known that his phone records could be used to track him. Megan reported that Chris seemed very strange that night. He appeared restless and anxious, and he said that his phone was not working, which was why he was late. After the date, Megan and Chris went to Megan's apartment, where they spent the night. According to Megan, Chris was extremely stressed, had not slept at all, and was sweating so much that she had to change the sheets in the morning. Investigators believe that Chris was worried because he still had Kelly's body in the trunk of his car and was afraid of being discovered. He was trying to find a place to hide her body. On the morning of October 12th, Chris said goodbye to Megan and left after trying to convince her to temporarily move to Denver, but she refused. Police tracked Chris's location history using his car's GPS, which led them to a cheese shop called Cheese House, 80 miles from Milwaukee. However, it seemed unlikely that Chris would have driven that far just to buy cheese. Chris claimed that he had bought cheese for his parents, presenting a receipt for the cheese at 9:55 a.m. on October 12th, which his parents confirmed. However, the police found it difficult to believe Chris's story, as the same cheese could easily be purchased at a nearby supermarket. They suspected that Chris might have dumped Kelly's body in the area around the cheese store. Further investigation revealed that on his way back, Chris stopped at a sports store and bought new sneakers that afternoon. Detectives suspected that Chris had deliberately discarded his old shoes, possibly to avoid leaving blood or footprints that could be linked to the crime scene. It appeared that he had carefully planned to destroy evidence and create an alibi for himself. Chris, with his analytical mind, had tried to commit the perfect crime. However, investigators were able to spot inconsistencies in his story. Notably, it took him over 2 hours to travel from the cheese house to the sports store, a distance of about 80 kilometers, when it would normally take only an hour. This significant time difference suggests that Chris spent an additional hour on another activity, possibly hiding the body. Police speculate that he may have dumped the body along the way. However, the exact location of the body remains unknown. With a large search area spanning 50 miles, finding the body proved to be a huge challenge. A roadside search eventually led to a discovery. In a wooded area approximately 37 miles from the city, a local resident found human remains while walking. Upon discovery, the resident immediately contacted the sheriff's office. Dental records confirmed the remains were those of Kelly Dwyer. This discovery finally ended Kelly's parents' long and agonizing search for their daughter. The next step was to secure justice by determining the exact cause of her death. Based on available information, the medical examiner believed she may have been strangled but not forcefully enough to fracture the hyoid bone. There was no direct evidence at the scene where Kelly's body was discovered, such as torn curtains, mats, towels, or bags. However, the position of the skeleton provided valuable insight. The body was found face down, with one arm trapped underneath and the legs bent in a way that suggested it had been hidden for some time after death. This finding further supported the theory that Kelly's body had been hidden in a golf bag. As evidenced by footage of Chris holding the bag and driving into the area where the body was discovered. While these findings were compelling, they were circumstantial and did not directly implicate Chris in Kelly's murder. Ultimately, it took 5 years for Chris to be formally charged in connection with Kelly's disappearance. The charges against him were manslaughter and concealment of a body, as investigators lacked specific evidence to prove intent. Theorizing about the events of that night, detectives speculated that Chris and Kelly had become intimate, but Chris got carried away with strangulation, leading to Kelly's death. The investigation revealed that Chris then ripped off the shower curtain, removed the rug and towels, wrapped Kelly's body, placed it in a bag, thoroughly cleaned the house, and disposed of it. Throughout the ordeal, Chris maintained his innocence in Kelly's murder. Key evidence was presented at Chris's trial, including CCTV footage, cell phone video of the strangulation, and the search of his apartment by a dog. Megan, who testified against Chris, reported that he was extremely anxious on the day of the incident and was late for a meeting. Additionally, Chris's former girlfriends took the stand, expressing their concerns about his unhealthy obsession with strangulation and rough sex, which had frightened them. The defense countered that there was no direct evidence linking Chris to the crime and that the prosecution's case was based on speculation and conjecture. Chris had a clean record before the drug possession incident and was a successful IT professional with a stable job. The defense argued that Chris was incapable of murder. However, it was discovered that not all the CCTV footage had been saved, casting doubt on the prosecution's conclusion that Kelly had not left Chris's house. The defense presented a witness who claimed to have seen a girl resembling Kelly in another man's car the weekend after she went missing. Although the witness had previously seen Kelly on TV as a missing person, he was not 100% sure it was her. The defense offered an alternative explanation for Kelly's disappearance, suggesting that she may have left Chris's apartment safely but was later caught by one of her new boyfriends. The defense also questioned the reliability of the police dog during the investigation. Since the dog's reaction was not captured on video, its alert was based solely on the police officer's subjective interpretation. In response, the prosecution argued that the investigation using the sniffer dog was conducted objectively and transparently, with multiple police officers present and agreeing on the results. Ultimately, the prosecution convinced the jury that Chris was responsible for the murder. With no other obvious suspects, the prosecution argued that Chris had planned and executed the crime carefully, deliberately destroying evidence to cover his tracks. After lengthy deliberations, the jury found Chris guilty of first-degree manslaughter and concealing a body. The Kelly family and the prosecution had asked for the maximum sentence of 48 years. While the defense asked for a reduced sentence of 22 years. In December 2018, Chris Sacco, then 43, was sentenced to 31 years in prison, including 26 years for manslaughter and 5 years for concealing a body. In addition, Chris Sacco was sentenced to 19 years for possession of child pornography and possession of narcotics, based on the outcome of his November 2014 trial. Chris Sacco is currently serving his sentence at the Green Bay Correctional Facility in Wisconsin. He will be eligible for parole in 2065, when he turns 93, essentially making his sentence a life sentence. Chris Sacco was unhappy with the sentence and attempted to appeal, but his appeal was rejected. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Valerie Reyes. Valerie Reyes is a 24-year-old girl. She grew up in a loving family in the suburbs of New York. Valerie has 3 younger brothers. Valerie is cheerful, sociable, and friendly. Valerie is very close to her mother. The two share their private secrets and often discuss everything like two best friends. Valerie has many different talents, including drawing and singing. However, her true passion is to become a professional tattoo artist. With the guidance of her brother, who has experience in this field, Valerie learned and developed her skills. She dreams of opening a tattoo shop with her brother, where they can turn their creative ideas into reality. During this time, Valerie works part-time at a small, cozy bookstore. Valerie's life took a major turn in January 2018. That's when she met Javier da Silva, a 26-year-old Venezuelan man who had just moved to New York on a popular dating site. Javier told a touching story about how he had to flee his country in crisis to save his life. Because of this, he was unable to complete his university studies. Currently, Javier is working hard in a restaurant to build a new life in a foreign country. Valerie felt sympathy for him and they started a romantic relationship after a few dates. However, the relationship developed too quickly and only lasted about 3 months. Javier mentioned marriage, which scared Valerie because she was not ready. After feeling that everything was moving too fast, Valerie decided to end the relationship. Javier initially made a good impression on Valerie's family because he seemed to care about her and wanted the best for her. However, when Valerie expressed her desire to break up, Javier's behavior changed. He refused to accept the end of the relationship. He sent dozens of messages a day, begging Valerie to continue the relationship. In September 2018, Javier called Valerie. He said he had used her bank card to pay for an online purchase and wanted to meet Valerie to return the money. Valerie immediately sensed something was wrong and suspected that it was just an excuse to meet. Valerie then confided in a friend and asked the friend to talk to Javier so that he would stop bothering her. After the conversation, Javier stopped calling and texting. Valerie felt relieved and could finally return to her normal life with small joys and exciting plans for the future. However, Valerie did not know that the worst was yet to come. On January 24, 2019, Javier, whom Valerie had broken up with long ago and had not kept in touch with, wrote to an acquaintance of Valerie. In the letter, Javier claimed that he had caught Valerie in bed with another man. This information surprised and angered Valerie because she knew it was not true. January 27th, after her shift at the bookstore, Valerie returned home and called her mother Ana Reyes in a state of panic. She cried and screamed into the phone that someone wanted to kill her. Valerie had been worried for days and felt that someone was following her. Valerie was so distressed that she could only cry into. After a while of talking to her mother, Valerie seemed to feel a little better. Before going to bed, Valerie texted her mother that she had calmed down and was ready to go to bed. Valerie's family became worried when she did not show up for dinner on January 29th. They kept calling her, but did not receive any answer. This made the family feel scared and uneasy. After waiting for a long time, the family decided to seek help from the police. On January 30th, they went to the police and filed a missing persons report for Valerie. The police immediately began investigating the case and began searching Valerie's apartment, but found no significant clues. There were no signs of a struggle or kidnapping. There were only small blood stains on the pillowcase in the bathroom, but the police thought it could be a simple injury. The police decided to look for Valerie and contacted her mobile operator. They discovered that Valerie's phone had been switched to airplane mode on the night of January 28th at around 3 a.m. Since then, the phone had not been turned on. This made the police and Valerie's family even more worried. But the most alarming fact was that someone had accessed Valerie's cloud storage and carefully studied all her photos, videos, and messages. Another worrying detail was that at 5 a.m. on January 29th, just 2 hours after the phone was turned off, someone had withdrawn $1,000 from Valerie's bank account. Surveillance cameras captured a man driving a black Honda to the ATM, quickly taking the money and disappearing. When the license plate was checked, police quickly determined that the car belonged to Javier, Valerie's ex-boyfriend. He was immediately placed on the list of prime suspects. During a search of Javier's home, no evidence was found relating to Valerie's disappearance. However, surveillance camera footage showed that on the evening of January 28, Javier left the house in a black Honda and went to Valerie's residence. Police checked Valerie's phone and found that there had been no calls or messages from Javier in recent months. This indicated that Valerie had not invited Javier to visit or meet. After Valerie went missing, Javier turned off his phone, so his movements could not be tracked. However, at 6 a.m., his cell phone briefly became active near Harrison, Connecticut. At 7:30 a.m., the phone was found in Greenwich. Javier returned home to Queens at 9:43 a.m., as confirmed by nearby cameras. Police later found that Javier had posted an old photo of them on Instagram the night before Valerie went missing. His posting of this photo could have been to let people know that they were still together, or it could have been some kind of secret sign. While the police were investigating Valerie's disappearance, Valerie's family and friends continued to search for her. They posted flyers with Valerie's picture and checked all of Valerie's usual haunts. A week passed in anxiety, with sleepless nights and exhausting searches. But still no results. On February 5th, highway workers saw a red suitcase on the side of the road. When they opened the suitcase, they saw a horrifying scene. Inside the suitcase was the body of a young woman. Her hands and feet were tied tightly with rope, her mouth was sealed with a thick layer of tape. Her thin shirt was torn, her jeans were torn and dirty. The girl was not wearing shoes. People noticed a terrible wound on her head. They immediately called the police to report the incident. The police arrived at the scene. Through tests, they quickly identified the victim as Valerie Reyes. Valerie's parents received news about their daughter. During the autopsy, the gruesome details of the murder were revealed. Before her death, Valerie had been severely beaten in the head with a blunt object, and then, while still alive, she had been stuffed into a suitcase and left to die. The evidence that Javier Dilva was involved in the murder was that Valerie's bank card was found in his wallet. During questioning, Javier gave a surprising explanation. Javier claimed that he had found Valerie's bank card and ID card at the bar. The police presented all the evidence they had gathered, including surveillance camera footage, details of his car, and the movements of his phone on the night of the incident. The police told Javier that they knew he was at Valerie's house on the night of the incident. Javier later changed his story. Javier admitted that he had been drinking too much that night and might have been at Valerie's house, but he didn't know everything. When the police showed him a photo of Valerie's body in a suitcase, Javier was shocked and cried. JV tried to justify his actions. According to his account, Javier went to Valerie's house that night after she invited him. They had sex, but during sex, Valerie collapsed to the floor and lost consciousness. Javier claimed that he wanted to help Valerie and performed CPR and cardiac massage on her, but all were unsuccessful. To avoid being charged with murder, he tried to hide the evidence of the crime. However, when the police asked why Valerie's body was found bound and gagged, Javier was unable to answer. When police later asked about Valerie's bank card, Javier stated that he had withdrawn another $4,350 from Valerie's account. During a search of Javier's home, Valerie's phone and laptop, which he had taken, were also found. Javier finally collapsed after a thorough examination of Valerie's body. There were signs of struggle and violence on her body. Under Valerie's fingernails, Javier's skin and blood were found. Javier's DNA was everywhere on the suitcase, in the car interior, on Valerie's belongings. Javier was immediately arrested and formally charged with the murder of Valerie Reyes. Under the pressure of irrefutable evidence, Javier da Silva finally fully admitted his guilt in court. On February 5, 2020, a hearing was held in the case of 24-year-old Valerie Reyes. Javier's lawyer tried to defend his actions, arguing that it was the result of a violent and jealous outburst, depression after the breakup with Valerie, and drug use. On September 3, 2021, the court affirmed that 28-year-old Javier da Silva was sentenced to 30 years in prison. This means that he will spend most of his life behind bars. The investigation also found that Javier had been living in the United States illegally. He arrived in the country on May 8, 2017, and his 90-day stay expired on August 5, 2017. Therefore, after serving his 30-year prison sentence, he will be immediately deported to his native Venezuela.